So welcome to NHS Dorset's Integrated Care Board meeting in public. A reminder that the meeting is in public, it's not a public meeting. So that means that we conduct the meeting in a transparent way so that the public can see what we do and hear the discussions that we have. But it also means that because it's not a public meeting, that we're not in a position to ask questions as we go along, unless the question has been submitted in advance. We have got a question that was submitted in advance today, so when we get to that, the relevant time of the meeting, I will of course take us through that. We have a number of apologies. I think what I'm going to do first is to start with some welcomes. So we've got Rachel Pearce, who's here as the Director of Commission. I don't know if you want to wave just for the benefit for those online. Rachel is the Director of Commissioner for NHS England South West, and so she's here with us today for both parts of the meeting. We've also got, and I'll come back and do some introductions properly in a minute, or I'll eventually do that. But we also have got some other members from of staff on Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, BCP Council, who will be taking us through the young people stories. And then we've got other people joining us for other parts of the agenda. In terms of, and I've also forgot to say, welcome again, Sue. Sue Payne, who's the Senior Healthcare Partnership Manager for Pfizer. We've seen you here before, so welcome again. And I think we've also got another member of the public, Robert Warningston, who's NHS Partnership Manager for Novo Nordisk, who is also the person that's raised the question that we will answer towards the end. I don't see Robert on yet, but he will be joining us on the line. And then in terms of apologies, we have Jim Andrews, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Bournemouth University, Matthew Bryant, who's the Chief Exec for Dorset Healthcare and Dorset Community Hospital. But I believe we've got Nick Johnson, who I can see on the screen, attending on his behalf. Good morning, Nick. Sam Crowe, Director of Public Health, Graham Parent, Chief Exec of BCP Council, and Vicky Slade of BCP Council. But we've got Gillian here in their stead, so thank you very much, Gillian. Spencer Flower, the leader of Dorset Council, and Matt Prosser. Paul Johnson, but I believe we've got Alison. Is Alison on?
Yes, she's online. Yeah,
Alison representing Paul Johnson, who's the Chief Medical Officer for NHS Dorset. John Sloper, Chief Exec of Help and Kindness, just for this session that's in public. And Forbes Watson, who's the Chair of the Dorset GP Alliance. But I believe that Simone Yule should be joining online, but she will be joining us. Yeah. And then we've got a number of other people online. So good morning. So before we proceed, can I just check if we've got any declarations of interest? If anything comes up as we go through, please indicate then. Of course, this being March, it means that we are heading fast, just over 3 weeks into the end of the financial and business year for the system. It's been a really challenging one. We've seen many challenges, in fact, haven't we, in terms of financial challenges for the NHS as a whole, but also for us as NHS Dorset. We've seen industrial action. And of course, we've had some real focus areas around performance that have been challenging also. So we will see papers and review those as we go through shortly and later today around where we are on all of those things. But just to acknowledge that we know it's not been the easiest of years. But you know, we are where we are, and we will make sure that we get to where we need to get to by the end of the financial year in a few weeks' time. And of course, we'll report back on that when we have our next board meeting as to where we've ended. The importance of that really is that it stacks us up properly for the next year, which commences in April. and the transformation agenda that we are on as NHS Sourced. So I just wanted to acknowledge that before we start. What I'm now going to do is to take us through the minutes of the last meeting. And if I can, what I will do is turn the pages on that. So if I can ask if we've got any amendments or corrections to the minutes. So starting on page 1 and 2. I think we've made one slight amendment to the conflicts of interest, which was John Beswick's interest, because he is still remains the CFO for Great Ormond Street. I think it's written in the past participle, so if we can just get that corrected. Page 3, page 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So I haven't seen any hands being raised, so we'll take that as an accurate reflection of the last meeting. Moving on then to actions. I think all of the actions on there are closed, with the exception of 240.13. And that was an action for Dean Spencer. I'm assuming that we'll pick that up later today. Will we, David or Dean? You want to, or do you want to say something now in relation to that?
Sorry, Jenny, just come off the regional call. We'll book it up later. Kind of.
We'll come back to it later. That's fine. Thank you very much. Okay. So that leads us on to the board story. And what's really nice is that we have a different partner presenting a board story this time. It's not unusual. We've had various partners across the ICB presenting stories, but I think it might be the first time that we've got one of our councils doing it. So Gillian, if I can hand over to you to kind of introduce your colleagues also and then take us through.
Thank you, Jenny. I didn't realise quite how groundbreaking perhaps we were being. Really exciting. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to present a story from the perspective of our world in BCP Council, and particularly in the context of our children's services work on early help transformation. We chose something when we were given the opportunity to come and present that we're really ambitious for in BCP Council, and also because we think it's really aligned to everything that we're trying to achieve in the Dorset integrated care system in terms of prevention and in terms of integration. So on that note, I will hand over to Juliet Blake and Pippa Emerson, who are in our children's services team. And I think Pippa is going to lead off, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, well, thank you ever so much for allowing us to come and have a chat and celebrate for the work that's been going on for nearly 12 months now. And apologies to colleagues in the screen. I'm sat right in the corner here, so you may not be able to see me, but I'm hoping you can hear me clearly. So very much thinking about children and young people and how they interface with different services and some of the feedback we were having. We started a journey to understand and do a diagnostic, to have a look as a collection of different agencies, how we were understanding the experiences of children and young people when they come into contact with our services and what that means with regards to support, and how we might be able to identify and intervene and prevent escalation of needs, because it's not only costly emotionally for children, but it's very costly in the pressure of our services. So this is what was the basis of our story. So to give you an overview of what we'll be talking about in the very short amount of time I've been given. So we'll talk about an early help system and what that might mean, who are those kind of important key stakeholders and how we've looked to shape that. I'll tell you a little bit about what children, young people and families within these communities have been telling us, for the last 12 months, and what they would like to see change with regards to how we interface with them and how they access our services. As a result of a significant diagnostic around the whole early help system, so that included yourselves as partners, but also our education partners. It included our partners in the community and voluntary sector. It included our education and SEND colleagues, and what it meant to them with regards to how we could work collectively to address some of the pressures and the difficulties that the families were experiencing. I'll talk to you about the transformation programme that's emerged from that and how we've come together as a partnership in order to be able to take a joint responsibility and step into a space that's quite pioneering in the context of where we find ourselves today. And I'll talk a little bit about the Family Hub transformation and how that's provided a really clear platform in which to grow that work. So I'm hoping that'll answer some of the story today. So thinking about what makes an effective early help system, this was taken across a number of different priorities and improvement plans and was directed around the Department of Living Up, Housing and Communities, as well as the Department of Education, with regards to how we can connect better with children, young people and families, intervene earlier, but most importantly, stop their needs getting more difficult and more challenging. There's quite acute and expensive costly interventions. The Early Help Systems Guide sets out a template for us for this thinking around core criteria that build in the maturity within an effective early help system, because we all recognise as different individual suites and organisations, we say we deliver against early help and we deliver against the early prevention agenda, but what that isn't is always connected, and as a result of that, families have very different experiences when they come into contact with our services. And what it wanted to do is set out a pathway for all associated services and components to work more collaboratively as a cooperative agency and a single point of contact around early help and early intervention. It looks to very much promote the early helpers in an intervention set of offers and provisions, as opposed to one particular service. And actually, by coming together and working more collaboratively, we'll have a better understanding and agreement how we can support children, young people, families and communities together. So these are the core components. So a whole system approach where partners understand what they contribute, their roles and responsibilities, and they sign up to that. That we have agreed processes for identification and pathways to make it easier for families and children to navigate through our services, and how we work together at different points of contact with those families. That the response is graduated, and where possible, we're intervening at the first opportunity, as opposed to having somebody to meet a set of criteria in order to be able to access different services, which then helps us balance the hot system we can sometimes feel like we're at when we're dealing with families at crisis. But also that it's holistic, that it's not actually looking at a range of symptoms that we're looking to address. It's not trying to understand more about the root causes and how we can mitigate those, and that families have the right professional at right levels, rather than actually being potentially put on a pathway to see different professionals and be assessed when that may not be needed. Most importantly, it's around it being timely. Families said they found it quite difficult with the number and growing waiting list across different services to be able to get the right support that stopped their needs getting more difficult and more challenging, and that we're able to evidence really clearly around the impact of that, because early help potentially as a culture before, it's been very difficult to kind of measure the difference that it's making, because you don't know what you may have mitigated with regards to kind of crisis in the future for families, and that partners understand what the priorities are and actually sign up to those as a joint service, as opposed to individual services, without losing their identity and key performance indicators that they obviously then have to report on. So again, with regards to the voice of children, young people and families, this is what they were telling us at the beginning of our diagnostic. So they got really fed up asking over and over again for help, and they were passed from service to service at different points, which didn't actually help them at all. That they found it really hard to find the right service that could help them, because potentially they would be giving information, advice and guidance, and they were being putting on pathways and different referral routes, and actually sometimes they were coming across different professionals that weren't the right for them. That they kept on getting passed and passed at different points of intervention. So actually it got really hard to identify a key worker that understood their story, and as a result we're having to say things over and over again. A lot of people reported that it took a long time for them to get the help they needed, and often when they were getting that help, things had escalated to a point where that help may have kind of looked at a particular symptom but actually then didn't help them with their needs. However, when they had a key worker, it was really good to have somebody that maybe could coordinate and bring those things together. So when we did our diagnostic, and again, this was across a collection of services, this is what we were finding. So we felt that we had an amazing and quite diverse, rich set of services with lots of good people who had a lot of will. There was a lot of activity across the partnership, and everybody could report that they were spending a lot of time and money on families with regards to addressing different things, and every service seemed really committed to supporting children, so they understood their role within it, and what they wanted to see was better outcomes for children, young people and families. However, some of the relationships across those partnerships were quite fragmented, and that people felt they were working best under pressure, and often they were being asked to commit to different things they didn't necessarily felt set within their service or their skill set. And as a result of that, there were some difficulties and challenges around trust in the way that those relationships were working. And there was a significantly high level of frustration in the system, with a sense that we need to rebuild a culture around joint working, that actually things have become very, very compartmentalised. People felt that there were limited tools, that there wasn't a clear workforce development strategy that allowed us to look at a set of key competencies around early help delivery that would help us get to a position of knowing and understanding. We felt that there was no shared assessment pathway, there was no planning pathway or care planning pathway for children and young people, and actually meeting intervention pathways became quite confusing for families when different people had roles and responsibilities to either step in or step out of intervention. What they were having a look at as a partnership as well was around kind of mitigating the symptoms and presenting needs, rather than the deeper thinking around the root causes of difficulties and challenges with families, and how we might bring some of that intelligence and that information that we were holding in order to be able to make some predictive ideas around what we might need to do next. And that was leading to a lot of re-referrals, because families weren't necessarily engaging or responding to offers that were being made if they didn't feel that it was right for them. And what we were seeing was a lack of sustained improvement. So there were a number of different children and families that were presenting at different doors with regards to services where potentially things were getting more difficult and challenging for them. There was a sense that there was some pigeonholing of children, young people and families with regards to how we approach our services, that even though they weren't the right fit, referrals or requests were being made to services that wouldn't have necessarily been right for that particular child, rather than looking at how we shape a needs-led service based on holistically thinking about these children and young people. And that children and young people were being supported potentially by the wrong service and potentially at the wrong level, which then was leading to a disproportionate saturation in certain parts of the system. So actually alleviating some of that pressure was becoming increasingly difficult. And as a result of that, we were trying to have a think about, if that was happening at an operational level, what was happening at a strategic level. And some of the feedback was around there wasn't a clear oversight or sense of strategic partnership that was driving some of this thinking and this planning, and therefore no outcome or impact accountability we could report on with regards to the effectiveness of early help and early intervention. So as a result, the limited whole child plan wasn't clear with regards to whether it was children's services, whether it was education and SEND, or potentially some of our health services, and also thinking about safeguarding, SEND, inclusion, health, etc. How could we begin to think differently and approach this differently? All of that sat within that kind of strategic and operational partnership of work across those connected services. So what have we been working on? So looking at the recommendations and what was said by the diagnostic, we've done a significant piece of work. So what I'm going to do is pass around the paper copies, have a quick look, and then kind of circulate. It's not the final proof. It's currently with the publisher around some minor alterations, but we've set up an early help partnership group that has a number of the connected services. If you were to look at page 6 on the strategy document, you'll see a lovely honeycomb that has a universal set of services, a more targeted set of services, and then acute set of services, and how they all interconnect with regards to the child's journey. So the Early Help Partnership Board was built to reflect that honeycomb of services at an operational and more strategic level, and it addresses the inequalities in effectiveness with regards to some of the things that we've talked about delivering so far. And there is lots of different people represented, so who's contributed towards this. So our local children, young people, parents and carers, of course, our health, so including midwifery, health visiting, school nursing, child and adolescent mental health services, our public health colleagues, our primary, secondary and special educational need colleagues, our special educational needs and disability colleagues, children's social care colleagues, our adult social care colleagues, our targeted support services, our services for young people, our family hub transformation services, our data and analytical services, our community safety partnership, our police and probation colleagues, our housing colleagues, substance misuse colleagues and recovery services, our youth justice services, and our community of voluntary sector services. So again, it's been quite a significant piece of work with regards to how we've looked to be inclusive as we can of this partnership. So within our pathway document, that's one of the second documents circulating, we've looked at pathways and processes that can strengthen that shared approach to the graduated response for children. It includes identification, support and planning around how, from a community and a local level, we can look at pre-assessment, full assessment, the role of linked professionals and lead professionals, and how we build that network of support around children, young people and families in order to be able to work collectively within our partnership and offer proportionate support when it's right for a family. We've done a really exciting piece of work around single outcomes framework. So across lots of different data streams, I'm sure some of you are aware of, there was about 90 key performance indicators that as a collective partnership we would want to look at, covering all of our different services and disciplines. And we've looked how we can narrow that down to 30 key priorities in order to be able to deliver against your key priorities, education, SEND's key priorities, early help's key priorities, etc., without kind of losing any quality of data that we have. So we've had a recent transformation piece of work around family hubs and how they are looking at this partnership of connected services, and we might offer a physical platform in which people can deliver, but also then deliver out from, and that provides that robust platform to think about 0 to 19 and up to 25 offers with regards to our children, young people and families. So the groups work across agencies with regards to these improvement plans and thinking about key kind of priorities that you will have as individuals. And obviously it remains quite agile and we're reviewing it all the time with regards to its effectiveness. So there is just a quick flash up of the documents that are circulating. Like I say, there are some typos and some different things that they're looking from a design point of view, they're changing, but that is already in the process of being launched. And we've got some partnership events that will be held by our honeycomb of connected services throughout April and May that, again, all of you will be invited to, but maybe not all of you, people you will delegate to. And all of this has been co-produced with our community of voluntary community services, our SEND services, our education services, as well as our health colleagues. So we've been really proud to be able to kind of talk about the difference that's made in the context of being able to work together. A little bit on the family hub and what's been happening within that world. So the key priorities was to increase access, improve connectivity and strengthen the relationships we have across the partnership. So we've been working as an early help partnership board in order to be able to consolidate some of the thinking and the way that this will happen. So with regards to access in BCP area, we have 6 dedicated sites that we are delivering connected services from. There are 2 youth access points within that, and there is 3 mobile units that can travel around the BCP area, basically a ward or a road level where they can deliver intervention. We've aimed to make it as flexible and responsive with regards to our outreach offer, understanding that some families, we don't call them hard to reach. We say we haven't actually managed to find a way to reach them yet. So we're trying to think all the time about how we can diversify the way we offer our services. We're looking at extending our opening hours because, again, a lot of our services tend to run business hours, but actually we do have working parents or parents with commitments that can't necessarily access things during our day. So how we go into early evenings and weekends as well. And we have a virtual hub as well as a virtual hub assistant. So again, trying to improve the quality of the service users' experience if they are coming through a digital platform. With regards to connectivity, a lot of our family hubs are our legacy children's centres, so I've had a real focus on that kind of best start for life, first 1,001 days and potentially up to 5 as children move to school readiness. But now looking at that 0 to 19 and up to 25 with SEND is quite a new way of thinking for those particular environments. And as a result of our partnership, we've been able to extend that. We've got a range of new pilot legacy services that are continuing to support us that we are building on. And we've had a really exciting opportunity through a community development fund where we've given some small grants around infrastructure to encourage the community to take a more active and stepped approach into the way that they deliver services to children and young people, because after our intervention often ends, those community services still need to wrap around families with regards to the resilience and those sustained improvements. And obviously some information around the relationship. So our partnership governance board, our workforce development plan. Again, we lost some traction, I think, post-COVID and LGR around that, but the idea that we can bring professionals together in order to train has been very exciting. And some of the difficulties or the challenges or the gaps within provision and how that's being managed with regards to waiting lists, etc., we've been able to address through some of that workforce development. How we've signed up then to the new joint assessment and identification pathways as well as the planning pathways has been really exciting in the context of the feedback we're receiving from families in the kind of like the early review of that, and our performance framework. So we're really excited to say that we're bringing together a shared information dashboard around the impact of this early help concept, which is actually quite new, not only for BCP, but I understand up and down the country. We're part of a regional centre that looks to review that and have a look where we sit kind of regionally and nationally. So we're excited to be able to, in the future, be able to report against the impact that this way of working is having. And then just to end, here's some comments we've had around the early kind of impact of that. the difference it's making. So not only our partners, but our children, young people and families are saying actually that support has been really timely in the context of, you know, potentially where they've had some difficult and challenging experiences before. They feel their children's needs are better understood by a range of different people, and those people are working together and they're getting the support they need in a faster and more succinct way. That the joined up approach is helping people not to have to repeat their story, and actually then it's reducing inefficiency as a result of the families feeling they're being moved from pillar to post. That children and young people are reporting to feel heard, actually in their stories understood, as opposed to so it's child-centered as opposed to child-focused, because obviously lots of different professionals using information and making decisions doesn't always mean that's a child's lived experience. Children are saying they're receiving the right support, or what they're receiving at the moment is right for them, and that there's been better information sharing across different agencies, and as a result of that, child's lived experience is improving. And there was just some nice little comments that we've had with regards to some feedback. So thank you so much for your time.
Very much. So do you want to go to a discussion now?
Yeah, if that was okay.
Would that be okay?
Because there was a next steps with regard to size. Okay. So this was kind of the discussion points that we had, but also more than happy to invite questions and discussions from.
So do you want to take us through those? Or you
yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
So with regards to kind of like the ICB and thinking about the governance structure of this particular partnership, we obviously have colleagues within BCP we would want to put it through with regards to transformation. But with regards to the ICP, the fact that our health colleagues are such a large part of this, we would like to have you as part of our governance structure. We would like to be able to report the successes or the challenges, the pleasures and the pitfalls back to you. But it's making sure that kind of partnerships understand the early help approach and how we are going to jointly promote that, that we want to ensure that the impact is being maintained, so we understand what it means in the context of kind of your priorities and what you're seeing for children, and that you can attribute that when early help is making a difference, that you are happy to kind of support in the single outcomes framework, and the key priorities that you have as health, they will not be lost, but equally there'll be some priorities with regards to the early help system we'll continue to work for. And also the reality as a result of early help being quite vulnerable in the context of services working under pressure when we're looking at efficiencies, etc. You know, it's highly likely that funds, resources, etc. can be taken out of this particular pot. So it's important that we want to remain focused with regards to early intervention and prevention, because you then avert higher cost and more costly interventions for families. So yeah, they were our next steps into support we would like from the ICB, if you're in agreement.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. And I know Debbie's indicating that you want to come in. So
if I may, yeah, thank you. Thank you for this. It's really good and really sort of comprehensive. Thank you. I suppose for me there was a couple of things. I think you've obviously talked about partners all the way through it. I guess for me it's just like, are there any partners that you might need some support with to engage? You know, are there any gaps in that we can help as an ICB? And I was actually thinking, you know, with my SRO for maternity hat on, are midwives involved? Are they a part of the hubs? You know, they really need to be. We want to start early help actually prenatally. You know, like actually sort of the more you can engage with women in pregnancy, the more you're going to get them then around the table as the children grow. So first of all there was that question, and then secondly, this really plays into our 5 pillars work, particularly sort of a couple of the pillars are coming to mind. Looking at Neil on screen, who will know exactly what number is what pillar, but yeah, so I just wondered whether we've sort of worked out how this work you're doing around the family hubs will sort of then naturally feed into our transformation work through our 5 pillars really as an ICB. So, but thank you.
Do you want me to group the questions and comments and then come back to you, or do you want to?
Yeah, I'm more than happy. I think I was doing the dog work in the context of presentation. I have my golf hat here. But also, again, in the vein of the culture that we're creating, if there are things that the partnership would like to answer to, I would appreciate being able to take them back to the partnership. Yes. and then
that makes sense.
I put that about.
So I've got 2 more people indicating then. So if I take Cecilia and then Jonathan, and then we'll come back to you.
I mean, great canter through an awful lot of work. I can see there's a massive gulp into this. I just wonder if at some point you could give us a little bit of a colour as to what sort of issues that the children will be coming to you with, and how parents will know that this exists, I suppose. And thirdly, what is an intervention in your world? Because you talked to intervention pathways, intervention things. You know, what's that sort of experience that people would have? Because that I think it might give us a bit more colour to this sort of thing.
Okay, Jonathan.
That's kind of a question for you, and a possible question for Kate as well. So I chair the prevention committee, and I think it's very interesting the way you put this together. And my question is there something we can learn where we put the neighbourhood teams together? Is this a blueprint for that? And how does this then dovetail into the neighbourhood teams concept? And are you going to work together on those things? Because this looks like a pretty good foundation for something like a neighbourhood team. So it's that coordination, that synergy. Looks like it could be a very good foundation to actually start working together properly on prevention. Yeah.
So I've got Ben and Dan, but if you want to come back on those questions, and then I'll go to Ben and Dan.
I was just going to start with the neighbourhood teams, because that's probably the one that makes my ears light up a little bit. We've said exactly the same thing, not just externally, but internally. How do we join together better? How do we make sure that our partners are in this? So there's a lot of work happening in adults, for instance, at the moment. There's a lot of talk around community hubs, but actually we're ahead of the curve in children's on this. We're innovative. We're ahead of most of the good and outstanding local authorities in this area at the moment, and partly because we got a grant, which helps. So we had a grant for family hubs. So I think absolutely there's room for that. And there's also discussions with police who are turning into place-based. So again, how do they link with the work we are doing, and how do they get the communities, the community aspects within that early help system? Because I know I've heard at least twice but actually this isn't us, this is early help, this is everyone in this room. It's schools, it's communities, churches, synagogues, it's even your supermarkets. Every single one of them is part of an early help system. And that's I think what we spent the last 18 months doing is changing the culture within BCP, that early help is something that sits over there and you refer to it. It's local authority, it's not. We have a duty to lead on it and collaborate or coordinate it, but it isn't just us. And I'm going to go on a little bit and then people will pick up. The targeted work we're talking about and the interventions, there's a window, a pathway, and we looked at health windows. So everybody calls them something different, whether you call them thresholds or what's the term, thrive, that's the model I think health work from. We've looked at all of those and we've got a window of the need. So if you think of what we call level 1, that's your universal services. So kids who need health visitors or midwifery, that would be a level 1 service most of the time, not always, because everybody gets it. And then the level 2 would be, let's say mum's pregnant, but actually there's other complications. So maybe mum's got diabetes, or maybe there's already known there's going to be a need for that child before it's born. That might put that child into a level 2. So it's a universal plus, as it is often a term that's used in different places for that. By the time it gets to Pippa's services, that's a level 3. So it's a targeted support. It's usually a more complex system. So for instance, mum may have mental health difficulties, the child may have a level of SEN, there may be some other health or disabilities within that family. Then that's a family that's going to need more support, and if they don't have that support, it's going to end up in our statutory services. So that would be our targeted support, I think. I think that's the term on it, targeted services. But it's not just, I'm talking with the social care head on in a little bit, but there are other bits are like CAMS. CAMS are likely to be in that targeted window, but also within the statutory window. So we're trying to work with CAMS at the moment, again, some really innovative work in that area of how we get CAMS or mental health addressed at that earliest level. And Pippa's mentioned about the impact of this. Just to put in context, for every £1 that you spend within early help for a child, the equivalent in statutory is £3. So it's a considerably cheaper way of doing it, but also it means those children have the right to human rights, right to private life. So what we're not doing is going in with, I'd say, the big sticks, from social care's perspective to make things happen. If we do it early enough, they never need to get to that point. And
you're talking about a real detailed understanding of those individuals to those families. I mean, that the data that you must have to be able to do that is really
We've got lots of data. So, I mean, because this work is also sitting alongside the transformation work. So we're looking at a new service delivery in terms of children's. So a lot of this work is hand in hand, because this is the foundations to me and my vision. This is 75% of the work that we should be doing with children and families. And then you've got that smaller world, which is the more statutory work, you know, and that's the way I would think all services want to be, because actually we don't have the resources to keep waiting for it to hit a statutory level. So if we can get this right, it's a massive impact on all of us, and it stops that crisis, because we know we're short with CAMS workers, you know, we're short with social workers, we're short with police, because the pressures on those services is through the roof. But if we can get this right for families early enough, it's absolutely the right way to go, and it fits too with this care review, McAllister care review, all about family help, all about that early prevention work.
So in answer to Debbie's question about maternity and midwives, do you have that engagement already?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
In fact, they're the two. So from what I hear from where I am, they're probably the two services that are really in there. And I think it's because they do the universal, so they're already involved in these families, and they are singing the praises already about family helps in the work. So yeah, they are brilliant, the two of them.
Okay, so let's take the next four, because I think Kate is indicating. So I've got Ben, then Dan, then Rhiannon, and then Kate.
Lovely, thank you. So really found that presentation really interesting. I suppose just building on the sort of neighbourhood team's comment actually, and the linking with PCNs and primary care, you know, completely support the idea about early intervention and the impact that has. And we see the fallout of that in primary care a lot, I think, in terms of the families and their attendance towards primary care and their benefits or detriments to their health. I suppose it's just an offer really to try and link some of this work in with the sort of developing services within PCNs, especially I'm thinking around some of our low-level mental health support with our PCN mental health support workers, some of our work with Dorset Mind and active monitoring services. So it's really more of an offer to say, you know, I appreciate a lot of the referral pathways don't necessarily come from primary care at the moment, they come through social care, health visiting services. But I think there is something around primary care having access to this and linking in with it.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. I just wanted to get a sense of the BCP population and how many kind of children and families you're interacting with. And then my question was about, I assume the demand for the service outstrips supply, and so just to get a sense of how many could you be serving versus how many you're serving now?
So the size of the population, it's just over 73,000 children, young people, not through to 17, and then there's another cohort up to kind of 25. We've obviously, because the way the services are split, they have different components with regards to count. We have around 2,000 contacts per month with regards to kind of children and families wanting a level of support and intervention. And as this is rebalancing the system, because there's a very limited number of pathways those children can come in where they're potentially still at an acute level. So for example, they'll be coming into the front door at social care because there might be difficulties with emotional health and well-being, and a child or young person self-harming, not eating, not sleeping, they're wetting, emotional school-based refuser. It could be because a parent hasn't made a safe choice around care for their children. It could be because their housing is vulnerable. And what we're trying to do with this partnership is make sure that there is more capacity to be able to take people in at an earlier stage, so they're not hitting a front door, you know, either potentially through A&E or potentially through children's services. And as a result of that, I think there's the capacity to support nearly that 73,000 in some way, because they will already be accessing a level of universal service, but will know about them as soon as they begin to kind of knock on the door if that's a more targeted need, rather than having to wait for things to get to crisis. So I'm hoping in part that answers your question.
It does,
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah. You've actually partly answered what part of my question, and it was, I guess it was where the continuum of are we really talking about preventing a crisis, or are we really talking about, you know, pushing upstream into preventing things in the first place? So you've kind of answered a bit of that, but I think
that will always be a challenge because universal services won't be able to mop all of that up because there'll be targeted things that universal services are looking at and there'll be other things that they're not. So I just think there's something in that space as well, if you've got a response to that. But the other thing for me was, I mean, this model has been very well trodden in other parts of the UK and probably England. I just wondered how much you've looked out and up to see, well, what's worked really well and stuck and continued, what's perhaps really teetered and failed, and how you get that learning so that the model that you're, which is a great model, just for the record, from my perspective, that it really has that sustainability and got all the bits that you need to kind of make it be as successful as possible.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on the integrated neighbourhood team question that Jonathan asked, because of course, children and young people are, you know, a key component of that model. And in the faith-based discussions last year, children and young people were identified as a priority. There's lots of connection because it's not just about what we do with the integrated neighbourhood teams, but it's also the CYP transformation program that's been underway, which really connects with local authority partners, and that uses the Thrive model, which is very similar to the basics. So we see a huge opportunity actually with the early help, and the family hubs are starting to build some of those neighbourhood models and supporting children and young people. And of course it dovetails, as you talked about, SEND, so going up to that 0 to 25, which is really important, isn't it? So yeah, I think that the challenge for us is how do we connect all the dots to make sure that we get that cohesive model within our neighbourhoods and communities.
Thank you. And Jonathan, I know you wanted to come back in, and then I'll go.
I just want to come back. So the literature around this is compelling, but the literature also says that it falls down because it's not embedded and there's not clear funding. So one of the questions is, how secure is your funding, and what's the opportunity of us helping with that funding? Is there a mechanism? As you start this strategically, you kind of got to commit to doing it forever. Otherwise, there's no point of doing it. We saw that with Sure Start, and there's clear evidence in America about this, where those states that have continued this sort of program have had massive gains, all sorts of things. And we will see this way down the line, and reduced obesity and all sorts of other things. But it's a long-term gain, and it's kind of, you pay your money, hold your breath. You're doing this for 20, 30 years down the road, but we'll see no gains from it at all. But you have to invest money in it now. So that's it. What's your funding security like, and what's the mechanism for us helping? It's something we want to help with.
I'll go to Juliet and Pippa, and then David, if it's all right, I'll come back to you to respond to that.
I'll start first with, in terms of what we've looked at. We have a consultant and an expert within early help, and that's what's taken us the time, because you can come in and you can go, well, we're just going to do this A to B, and we'll do it in 3 months and it's great. We would not have changed the culture in that time, so the cultural changes what's been key on that. So she's brought with her obviously all her information and expertise from other areas that she's worked. But also the key for me was the diagnostics. So I've been in basically 2 years. And when I came in, I thought we seem to have a vacuum within the early health arena. Don't know where it is, which means there's an awful lot of work coming in at statutory level. And actually, it wasn't that at all. There was no clear pathway. So once a child was in need of a service, what they couldn't work out is how they get from one to the next. And our partners too didn't know that there was anything else. So really disjointed system, which is now fixing, or near enough mended, I would say. I'll be optimistic. I think it's near enough mended, which is really positive. In terms of funding, absolutely, it's a risk area, and I would say it always will be, but I'm a little bit hopeful maybe it won't be that way in the future. And again, if you look at the care review and what McAllister's recommendations are, they're all around family help and that early intervention and prevention work. So my hope is longer term that it will be a statutory requirement to fund early help work. The council, BCP Council, has been really supportive of understanding how important early help is. And again, despite the pressures in terms of council and funding and the money budgets, I think there's a real realization if you take away your early help, all you're going to do is increase your cost. So I think that to me is the selling part of this, excuse the pun, but it is, because actually if you remove it, you're going to spend 3 times as much dealing with it at a later time. But it's the longevity. You can't just look this year and what money's available in the pot this year. You've got to look at that longer term. And I remember one of our counsellors had asked me, well, when are we going to see a difference? I said, well, actually, it's the lifespan of a child. So you may not see the difference for that child. He may be 5 this year, but by the time he's 15, maybe he's not antisocial behaviour involved. Maybe he's still in school. Maybe he's got qualifications. Maybe he's not doing county lines or other things that we don't want children to get involved in. So, and again, it is hard to measure, but this we've done a lot of work around single outcomes framework, which will help us measure all of these children, and it will show us where the needs are, so we can be a lot more innovative and research based in terms of what is it we actually need in that early help arena to help make sure these kids are getting the needs met at the earliest opportunity.
Go on, Gillian.
I just wanted to add into that. I think one of the things that's so powerful about the way that the teams have done this is that we do have work with data kind of embedded in there. Because we're going to have to keep making the case for this. And the more that we can develop the evidence base over time, it will take time, as Juliet says, to develop that. But we need to be doing that from the start. And I would say the same for the integrated neighbourhood teams as we start building that up. How are we building in our thinking about data and evaluation so that we can keep making the case? And I'm really glad we've established the relationship with the ICB, because it may be that we need to come back saying, how do we keep making, here's the case, and how do we keep the funding sustainable and going? So thank you for that.
Please, can I just build on that, just because Juliet mentioned around the kind of £1 invested in early help, £3 saved potentially in higher tier services. So that isn't something that we've imagined. There's a national cost benefit tool that we requested, and the consultant and the teams worked together in order to be able to understand based on 12 months of data. So requests for support coming across all of our services, so into statutory services, into emergency hospital beds, into kind of placements, and looked at the number of people that came in, the level of assessment that they received, the professional was then assigned to them, and that's what the calculation came from. So based on, I think it was 2022 figures, there was a £5 million investment across the whole of the early help and early intervention spectrum, and as a result of that, it saved £50 million with regards to that higher level of support in our services as a result of that. And that's not, again, just a point in time. Those children's outcomes were tracked for 12 months and they didn't represent. So the idea that, again, we've already got that level of evidence based on data, because we pull a number of different streams under information governance as part of our work, is significant. And I know it's not necessarily for this meeting, but another exciting part, because again, this is a systems change we're looking at. We're also looking at information automation, so we can begin to not only think about children, young people, the information we have on them, but also those predictive analytics that could say, as a result of knowing this about child A at this point in their life, we could begin to predict based on research and practice, but also their trajectory, that they're going to require this level of support and intervention, and begin to bring those plans together sooner rather than waiting to knock on doors. And that's very exciting. Central government have showed quite an interest in how much we've kind of moved towards that model, but again, it's in the very early stages, and we can come and talk to you about that another time, I'm sure.
So many things I could say about this, and our time's tight. So I'm going to just sort of cut to the So firstly, brilliant. Thank you so much for bringing it here and sort of sharing it out with such enthusiasm and passion and energy. And I'm sat here smiling, thinking this is exactly what we're about. This is perfect. The first thing I wrote down was holistic partnership together. And we have the pillars of our integrated care partnership strategy, which talk about prevention and early help, thriving communities, and working better together. And that goes right to the heart of everything you said there. The other thing that made me smile was the way that place-based partnerships or place-based working and integrated neighbourhood teams just came quite naturally into your conversation. I thought, yes, it's starting to connect, because it's not a construct just for the sake of it. It's trying to get all these things connected and working better together. So I just want to play back my, well, you can tell, enthusiasm for that. I did want to touch on the point. I did write it down actually before I was invited to comment on it, which is about the funding. And actually, it's not an ambition of ours to try and support things like this. It's our purpose. It's what we exist to do. That's why ICBs and integrated care systems were created. So we do have plans and work and commitments that we will shift budgets over time to this. We can't do it quickly, but we can do it over time. So as we are avoiding the use of higher tier services, that will free up money that can go into supporting this. In the meantime, we can work towards pooling our commissioning budgets or more of those budgets to make some of this work happen jointly. And of course, as we're working through the integrated neighbourhood approaches, we take a whole population approach. What you would then get is access to all that capacity, time, resource. And you heard it from Ben, you're getting it from maternity. We can bring all those assets into bear to try and help this move along while we build that sort of more sustainable model. So that's our commitment to it. And if it's not happening, come back and knock at this door and tell us that actually we need to talk to you again because you're not following through in what you said.
If I can just also sum up. So again, a big thank you on behalf of the whole board actually for bringing this today. And a couple of things that come to mind for me. So my personal view is that the outcomes don't take a long time to get there. I don't actually believe that. I think you get success quite quickly, particularly with children and young people. But what you also get is you get the long-term benefits and outcomes. And so there's something about how we measure the immediate stuff, but also how we measure that as we go through, because there will be some long-term gains that we can get from this also. And I wonder if there's something for us to do, because you know, it's lots of data. You're rich in data, we're rich in data. We've got a wonderful data insight service that we can, I don't know how much your data is linked into that. But your one of the last things you talked about was the predictive analysis, and I wonder how we can utilise what we've got collectively, particularly with the DICE, to actually start moving into that arena. So if I can ask Stephen and David to kind of just think about that as an action, working with others to see what we can do in relation to that. And then the very last thing, which was the point that Juliet made around saying you, we need to start saying we, don't we? And this is not just about the children's agenda, it's about the wider thing. But actually, if we can start practicing it with this, then we will start and really get on the journey around the prevention and having the impact that we want to do. So thank you very much for coming today. You're welcome to stay and participate in the rest of the meeting if you want to, but you're also free to go if you don't want to. And then I'm going to move us on then to your
Thank you, everybody. So, colleagues, I'm going to take the report as read, and obviously I'm happy to take any questions or comments at the end. I have 5 things that I specifically want to update on and bring into this report. Largely because these developments happened after we finalised this report and submitted it, and I think they're important in the context of what we're trying to get at with the Chief Exec's report around strategic development, the key developments that are happening around us. So I've got, first off, just to sort of acknowledge that we've received SEND service directions from the Secretary of State for the BCP area. This means that we are being directed to take further actions in certain ways and at certain timelines with certain conditions imposed upon us in order to fast track and accelerate improvements in the special educational needs and disabilities services that we offer to children and young people in the BCP area. It is received by the local authority, this set of directions, but it is targeted at all partners. So that's now live, and there's been some publicity around that, which you can follow if you're interested in further. On the 26th of February, Dorset Council informed us that CQC and Ofsted are starting a SEND inspection, an inspection of SEND services across the Dorset Council area. Again, this is about all partners. And that is now live and active, and that runs until the 14th of March. And Kate told me just before I came into this meeting, she might miss her later agenda item because she's got to go out to one of these meetings. So we're trying to be active partners in that. And the focus of this is the local area's partnership arrangements for children and young people with SEND. So that didn't make it into the report, but some critical work and prioritisation for us as we go forward. I also wanted to update on the strike action. You might have seen that the senior consultant vote on an initial offer from the government with the BMA narrowly missed support from the consultants with a 51-49 split. But in the last couple of days, there's been a revised offer negotiated with government and offered back, and the BMA are proposing that senior consultants accept that offer. So now go to ballot, and we'll wait to hear if that follows through. But that is really encouraging if it happens, although it might have consequences for others who didn't get quite as good an offer. Junior doctors, meanwhile, have just finished another round of strikes. This has a major impact on us in Dorset because at UHT, for example, 70% of junior doctors took some form of action over the series of strike days that we've had in February. So it's major impact. There's no news yet on the outlook for a pay deal for junior doctors. We're being asked to plan our next year's services and activity with strike action not included or anticipated, but we don't know where that's going. So just wanted you to be aware of that very local issue. The other big news I wanted to share, very much hot off the press, and my document's still warm on this one, because I've received several briefings. You will have seen it in the news. And also, we had a national meeting about it yesterday and a regional briefing this morning about the budget impacts for the NHS. And apologies to non-NHS colleagues in the room, but just wanted to let you know about some of the key headlines there in case you haven't got to it yet. So, as part of the budget settlement, the NHS has got a £2.45 billion uplift to its budget over the next spending period. However, that is largely to fund pay rises, and 2.1 billion of that will go to fund cost pressures, pay rise cost pressures in the system. Now, it feels like that might be a give with one hand and take the other, but actually that is a really helpful settlement because for several months we have feared that those pay rises wouldn't be funded, which would have left a 2.1 billion pound hole in NHS finances. So it is good news overall that we've got that funding, but it doesn't leave a lot over. So we are still in a very highly pressurised financial situation. You'll be aware also, I think, of the £3.4 billion that's been confirmed for, not exclusively, but almost on tech, digital and AI projects and programmes, really with the goal of improving productivity. So that comes with a significant string attached. The NHS will have to demonstrate that it is improving productivity by a further 1.9%, and that's on top of current cost efficiency and workforce control growth programmes that we have to have in place. And generally speaking, over a longer period of time, productivity in the NHS runs at about 1%. That is significant. Some other good news that was confirmed in passing by the Chancellor at the dispatch box yesterday, but certainly underscored in subsequent reports, is the really positive, encouraging news of the progress we're making in the NHS nationally. And we are doing a fair bit in Dorset to contribute to this. We are nationally showing improvements across all performance measures in the NHS. So all those critical performance targets around handover times, A&E delivery, cancer, faster diagnosis, diagnostics, all those things are improving. That's not quite the same thing as hitting the targets that have been set in all cases, but certainly the massive improvement. And a figure that really stood out for me is that the NHS is seeing 1.9 million more people in A&E within 4 hours than we were this time last year. That's massive. Really, really good. Even though if you see the headline, we're not actually hitting the target that's been set, but it's really encouraging progress. That helps, and that's probably why the NHS got the settlements it did in the budget, because that we've just started to turn the tide in terms of those performance measures. However, there's always a however. One of the other things, the final thing I wanted to bring to your attention, it is mentioned in the paper at 3.3 and 4.1, but it's around the planning round for 2024-25. Right at this moment, very live at the moment, and the reason colleagues were slightly late coming in is we're in the middle of a significant planning process in order to confirm our operational plans and budgets for next year, as colleagues will be aware. With the finances, as with all our local authority partners, again, it's alluded to in the paper, are financially challenged systems, and we've got to try and square the triangle or the circle to try and make this work for our population next year, and it's proving particularly challenging. As a result of that, we are getting quite a bit of scrutiny and asks for further information and further clarity from regional colleagues and subsequently national colleagues, and we're working very hard to put that through. So there are some challenges in place. The deadline for a final submission of our operating plan, which includes finances, is the 21st of March. That's for the health plans that we need to submit. And health partners, we've set aside some dedicated time to work together and go through this stuff line by line, so we're absolutely crystal clear and we're all behind it. And that will take place on the 12th and the 18th of March. And then within that, just to really underscore that the finances are a particularly challenging area. And we have a meeting of the national team on the 14th of March. We're right in the throes of the planning for all of this, and some of that timeline's been set by the fact that we've been waiting for this funding settlement from the department in order that we can confirm our allocations for next year and therefore make appropriate plans. So we have been hamstrung by that delay to that process, but some encouraging signs and work to be done. So that's all I kind of, that's not in the paper, but I think it's very pertinent to where we've got to, the context we're working in. So I want to in alongside the content that's in your paper and your pack, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, David, and thanks for bringing us up to date, because that's what this section is for, isn't it? So I've got Simone and then Siobhan. I've got hands up, and then Debbie.
Thank you, David. I'm not sure whether this is the right forum, but you were talking about pay and contracts, and I just was wanting to check that the board is cited on the sort of current GP contracting position for 24-25 and the 2% uplift, which doesn't really touch the sides of staff pay costs and energy costs. So there's two elements to that. I think the risk to primary care, but also the risk, I guess, to the system if industrial action is decided on. There's a referendum that started today for BMA members on industrial action. So I'm sure you are cited, but it's always primary care never seems to be talked about. And actually, this is a major issue for us, especially with the cost of living rises and energy bill rises. So again, it's just another risk to our resilience.
Simone, Siobhan.
Hi, morning everyone. I suppose my reflections, and David, that was all encompassing, are that actually it has been incredibly challenging, but actually over the last few months, sort of the way we work together as a system has been really strong. It's been really tough, and it will continue to be tough. But actually, I sort of have seen our system working in very different ways. But my point is just to add some positivity into the conversation. The staff surveys have come out publicly this morning about 10 o'clock. And actually, if you look at Dorset overall as providers and the ICB, our results are strong. And if you think about that as a reflection, I know it's not primary care, Simone and Ben, but it's the providers and the ICB. I just think in terms of the last 12 months and sort of how we've managed to maintain staff engagement and the connectivity with staff, that is really good for Dorset. We've got more to do, lots of improvements to make. We'll look at the detail together in future, but I just thought we should take a moment to say that is quite an achievement in the last 12 months.
Thank you. Debbie?
Thank you. Just a couple of things I just wanted to add to your report, David, if I may. So just the first thing around section 2.2 Martha's Rule, just wanted to make sure that the board was aware that that UHD actually are up and live with regards to their outreach service under Martha's Rule. I'm not sure whether you've been selected as one of the 100, Siobhan, but already up and running. So and Dorset County Hospital are linking in to to make sure that they sort of share the learning from UHD. So we're quite in quite a good place with regards to that across the system, which is helpful. And then with regards to the dental plan, obviously in your report, David, you've mentioned the challenge we face around dental services across Dorset, and I just wanted the board to know that we've actually asked for a deep dive into dental services at our next SQD, which is at the end of March, so that we can actually look at the activity we've done over the last 12 months since we've been commissioning, and sort of what steps we've taken and where we're progressing with regards to quality and patient safety. So just and that will then feature in the next quality update for the board. So just want to draw all those two things. Thank you.
Just because we are in the public part of the meeting, system quality group for those that didn't get that. Dan.
Thanks. I wanted to ask two specific things, but as a kind of an apology for being in the weeds, I just wanted to endorse what Siobhan said, because reading this, it strikes me as a bit of a risk and activity, a really helpful risk and activity update. There's loads of success we could pull out, and so I think it'd be great to see that kind of come through in future CEO updates. And then, sorry to ask two very kind of specific questions. In the Dorset healthcare part, it talks about the capital investment in the Blandford Community Hospital. I don't know if that's a direct award or if that's something that's flown through us as a system, but it just made me think about estate strategy, capital prioritisation. Is this where we're going with the transformation plan? And so I'm unclear on the funds flow, but whether it's something that the ICB influences and how all that fits together. And then a similar question, I think it was in the UHD bit around the electronic patient record, which I'd understood was a system-wide approach, but it's updated in UHD. So can I read between the lines that UHD is leading on that on behalf of the system and the ICB's involvement in that? So it's just those two things that I just wanted to, I can see Siobhan and Nick, but both smiling about that, but I just wanted to understand kind of how that was being implemented. Thank you.
So I was going to go to David, but Siobhan, you've put your...
Yeah, I was just going to say about the electronic health record. I mean, just I suppose we're working, as everybody knows, we're working with Somerset and Dorset. I'm now the vice chair of the Dorset and Somerset programme board. Peter Lewis chairs it. And it has ICB colleagues absolutely integrally as part of it. So we're in this together, is what I would say.
And Siobhan, is it PAN providers?
Yes.
So
thank you.
I think Dan's point about where that appears is useful actually, because otherwise you could assume that it is just a UHD thing. So just for us to think about that moving forward. John.
There is a join actually about what we heard about the role of data and how we understand the communities in Dorset. The link into what was announced in the budget yesterday and the benefits and the outcomes that flow from something like an electronic patient record. And I guess for me, I think that is the type of investment that could be supported. But I think using that as a pan system programme to really say these are the outcomes, be they, for the people of Dorset, how it allows us to tie together services and invest around them in a different way, but also to get there will be a pound productivity benefit. We talked about it on children. If we do the right things early, there will be a benefit down the line. That feels like it could be quite a good lighthouse project to kind of lean into that type of funding that was announced yesterday. So I just wanted to draw some of those streams together.
Probably, I don't know if David was going to pick this up, but the EHRs, the electronic health records, are exactly a focus for NHS England as digital transformation. So yeah, you're right, it is part of that. I'll go to Nick and then I'll come back to you, David. Oh, sorry, Lisa.
So just on the EHR, as Siobhan said, absolutely a system approach across Dorset, looking at all the different parts of the health sector in particular. So acute community, mental health and primary care, but we're working through kind of phasing and how that would all work. So the business case is in development, but a real joint approach there along with Somerset. On the Blandford point, I'm like, that's something that's been Blandford Community Hospital, that's been something that's been I guess in development for a number of years. But I think, and Rob and others might want to say more about this, we are moving to a place where there is, I guess, much more coordination in terms of overall capital investment across the system, and we're, I think, trying to get to a place where there's much more sharing of capital programs and thinking about the overall allocation of CDEL and where we put that investment. And we have, through the provider collaborative, in particular, a sort of a strategic estates approach, primarily focused around NHP, but starting to pick up other elements of capital allocation as well.
Lisa, and then David.
Did I imagine this, or at some point in the evolution of this report, did we used to have a section from the VCSE that we're now not getting?
We have actually asked for one, and I think it was being developed, but it's still not there.
Contributions
So,
each time, sorry, and we go with what we get.
It would be nice to have that, because it's very public sector, very statutory focused, and I think if we're going to be relying on the VCSE to help us with this, just some kind of litmus test on where they're at with funding, with capacity, would be really helpful in this paper.
Right, David, that's you.
Yeah, okay. I'll be brief because I know we're slightly over. So, someone absolutely correct around GP situation. It's complex because yes, the headline offer is 2%, but there are other strings and things attached into that, and that is going to, as you said, you called it a referendum, but that was really rather nicely put. We are very, very alert to it, and we're doing all we can to support. And I promise you that it will come forward in future reports. Siobhan, can I just say thank you for signalling and flagging that people. I guess it's easy for me to say we're working together because I want to say that, but it's nice to have that played back. We're having some really, really tough conversations about our financial situation as a group. We're really challenging each other, and yet we keep coming back and we keep promising to try and look again and probe some more. And I think that talks to the strength of the partnership that we've got, that we can have honest conversations and come back together and try again and work again and try and find the answers and the solutions we're looking for our population. Really pleased with that. Dan, thank you for your comments on the report. I think we should work that in. I think Nick picked up the Blandford one, but I would add that yes, it's kind of goes through Dorset Healthcare in this case, but we are invited as part of the capital bid. The ICB is invited to comment on it, and we are clear and committed to it being part of our strategic ambitions, and that's what we underscored. And so it's a really good development for the population out there and for us overall. It's a real model for how we want to do it. I'd like us to capture as an action around bringing forward a briefing on electronic health record. I think it's come up a couple of times. I was thinking back, I think you mentioned it last time, Dan, or somebody did. And so it's telling me that there's probably not enough sort of oversight or awareness of what's involved. So if we could capture that as an action, and we'll organise bringing it forward as a briefing item or whatever's the right thing to do, but certainly bring forward what's going on and what we're intending to do. And John, I don't know whether we'll have enough detail of the information coming out of what's in the budget opportunity, but we'll do our best to tie that in when we bring it forward as well. And yes, I think I sort of came in, and we do normally seek contributions from all partners, but I guess that's a signal to us to say, try not to run it without that contribution.
Okay, so I'm going to move us on. We are running slightly behind time. Okay, so we've got this second of our regular reports, which is the quality report, and obviously it's to give us an update on the key quality and safety issues. So Debbie, I'm going to go to you for that.
Thank you. So again, like David, I will take the report as read, and hopefully most sections actually are self-explanatory, but I'll just dive into a couple of areas if that's okay. So we've talked about industrial action already, and I think industrial action isn't going away at the moment, sadly, in relation to our junior doctors, and we've already been advised around primary care colleagues also being kind of like balloted at the moment. So I think we continue to manage that as effectively effectively as we possibly can. I think we're providers supported by our system control centre are actually managing the industrial action really well. It's really difficult to measure harm actually for as a result of industrial action, and I've been on a national group that's been looking at, as well as actually our providers are continuously trying to look at and focus on the prevention of any harm. We do know that actually there will be harm. There will be harm to patients that are actually increasingly having to wait for procedures, but we likely won't see the impact for several months. But we are doing everything that we can to minimise that, and I think our providers, alongside of our system control centre, are actually doing that really well. So, but that doesn't mean to say that we're not continuing to monitor it, and we continue to look at it at our system quality group with regards to looking at ways that we can actually measure harm and gain any sort of learning across our system. SWAS, the South West Ambulance Service, we are obviously the lead commissioner for SWAS, which is why this is in the report. I think sort of probably not surprising, but nevertheless concerning. They undertook a review of data exercise and have clear evidence that sadly patients that have had a sudden suspected cardiac presentation are surviving, the rate of patients surviving 30 days following that episode has actually significantly dropped since 2020, and it appears to be linked to extended waiting times for an ambulance, and that doesn't come as a surprise to us, I guess, but it's still really concerning there in data, isn't it? I think I just need to clarify that actually we're doing pretty well in that element, and Dean will come on to that in his performance report, but actually this isn't such a concern for us in Dorset, but it is a concern for us as lead commissioner for the South West Ambulance. The data is obviously working in other areas, and we need to be aware of that. We need to link into our colleagues across the region. And so the ambulance service now are actually going to do a deep dive into the impact of handover delays, which I think will be really helpful for us going forward, and that's coming to the next quality report. So I'll bring that back next time, because we obviously do have some handover delays, although again, sort of we're not as bad as some areas across the Southwest, but nevertheless, any handover delay can have an impact. I just wanted to draw your attention to the really good work that Dorset Healthcare have been doing around the out of area mental health placements. They have made significant improvement in the number of out of area placements since they started to work following the Regulation 28 letter. Obviously still work to do because we need zero, so still some work to do. But I think what's been really important is that those that are out of area, there's a much more robust commissioner sort of led clinical assessment of those that are outside of the of our area, to make sure that even if they're not being placed in our area, they are getting a good level of service, which is really important for our patients. So the right care, right person is on the agenda later, so I'll jump straight over that. I think the last thing I was just going to highlight is the medical examiner programme, which goes live, rolls out from April 24, is fast approaching. So we're working with our primary care practices to make sure that they're up and ready for the change around death certificate notification. And I think it's fair to say that we've worked at pace on the east side of the county. We've got a little bit of slower rate on the west, and we do need to do some work over at Catehead. We've got 5 practices who have yet to engage yet, so we do need to try and work with those, because otherwise they're going to find themselves in a position in April where they suddenly have to do something that they perhaps might not be ready to do. So we'll spend the rest of March really working to make sure that all of our practices are up and ready with regards to going live. I'm happy to take any questions, but otherwise the report's as it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Alison.
Thank you. It was really just to touch back on the impact of the industrial action, really, and I know this represents a very tip of the iceberg of harm, but it may be helpful for the board to know that in the Southwest there's been a piece of work that has been done through the critical thinking unit, which has at the moment certainly has not shown any impact on mortality. through the periods of industrial actions, and they're keeping an eye on that. There has been some really good work done in Cornwall looking at mortality across pathways of people who are on the waiting list, and I'm hoping to have a look at that as chair of the mortality surveillance group to see if there's anything we could learn alongside Helena Posnett, who's our public health representative. I think one of the things that we just need to remember rather than keep an eye on perhaps is that if the industrial action is continuing, despite the really positive staff surveys that we've had today, which is great, we do know that it's starting to have an impact on relationships, and I mean that across the breadth of relationships within our organisations, and between consultants and junior doctors, and between doctors and those who, and then the sort of management and leadership within. So I don't think we can forget that, because that's going to be something we'll have to pay a lot of attention to make sure that we continue to foster those, because otherwise we will get the harm appearing.
Okay, thank you, Alison. Rhiannon?
It's not really a question for Debbie. I think it's how can we improve the access and therefore the visualisation of the primary care data, because I think it's an area where we said it's quite difficult to get the data in terms of the things that we typically look at, isn't it? As it's only some measures of quality. So I just wondered if there is something that, as a whole board, is there anything more that we can do in terms of having better access to data, or the creation of, the capture of, and the visualisation of data from primary care perspective?
Anybody that is able to answer that, or do you
maybe want to take away, but I think it's, yeah.
We have done some work just on a dashboard, on GP dashboard. I think it's just about what do we want to take a focus on, because the data's there. The issue, of course, is about coding and our practices depending on how they code. So that's one of the underlying challenges, which is why we talk about or put the caveat around the data from general practice. But happy to take that.
Yeah, I think it's particularly around sort of opportunities for concerns, complaints, feedback. Because if we sort of look at this, it's very low, and that then you wonder about how much effort is happening in terms of getting the voices of populations that are receiving services from our primary care. That's what
it's an issue that's been raised before, isn't it? So Rachel, I know you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I just on the primary care aspect, we continue to work across the board in the region in terms of actually in a good place, like Windows, but in terms of improving quality of care around primary care, making sure that we're all kind of looking at the same thing as well, so we get that consistent feedback benchmarking. Just the other thing I wanted to raise is obviously we talk about waiting. And often focus around acute services, but there is an increasing profile around community waiting, which I think is equally important. And again, as the data becomes more reliable, we're getting that visibility. So that's something that we're trying to discuss with the community providers currently.
Thanks very much. Cecilia?
Which feeds into the sort of question I was actually thinking, the follow-up waiting list piece here, and the impact of that on primary care and other services. And I can see, if I'm reading it right, we've chosen a few follow-up waiting lists to assess, rather than actually look at follow-up waiting lists in general. Is that what we're doing?
Yeah, I think we're trying to. I think each of the providers have actually picked an area, and we've picked 3 different areas. So that actually, Dorset County are doing ophthalmology. That's because that's large numbers. So actually, if you look at ophthalmology, that gives you a sort of good indication of any sort of levels of harm. I think it is difficult, Celia, and I think at the moment, I think it's fair to say that we're not seeing significant harm as a result of industrial action, but we're just trying to keep looking at it a bit like Alison said. We're continuously looking at it in different ways, and I think by picking different areas, we can actually then evaluate the findings of those areas, and then we can roll it across the system, both in way of a methodology to use to actually look at harm, but also by way of if it's showing that there is harm, within patients waiting for ophthalmology, for instance, then we need to roll that out across the system. So,
I can understand physical harm is easier to measure than the mental health, the anxiety, and the impact on other services. And I think here, where someone is not being able to access the service they would expect, that the general practice will be overloaded with people who are anxious because they're still waiting for those services.
And that's why we captured that. We recognise that in the report, that we know that it's having an impact on primary care colleagues with regards to patients having to continue to access them whilst they're waiting. So absolutely, yes, thank you.
Okay, so let's move on to the third of our regular reports, which is the finance update. We've obviously said quite a bit about finance at the moment, but Rob, you want to give us an update as to where we are, particularly as we head into the end of the financial year?
Yeah, excuse me, I've got a slight cold, so I hope I'm not infecting.
Down that end of the table.
Well, where better than to have a cold in the NHS? We're in the so I've just made a few notes. I won't go through the paper, take it as read. So it's always slightly bizarre when you read NHS finance reports towards the end of the year, because we always have these sort of targets of break even, or we've got 12.3. And when you look at the year-to-date deficit, it's usually miles away from it, and we are. So we're reporting a 36.7 million year-to-date deficit on 10. As I said, what normally happens in the NHS is that people sort of accrue that costs will happen, but they might not have been spent. And it's in the last couple of months that we then realise they're not going to be spent, and then we take the benefits. So it's not what's the word? It's unnatural. That's not the right word, but it's not unusual. Thank you. It's a brain fog. It's not unusual to see quite a high number that then corrects itself. However, we do know, and we're going to have this conversation in part 2, that correction might not necessarily. That correction might. Who's got? That's what it sounds like. Oh God. Yeah, it's not. So that correction is. We're going to struggle to get to the position that we've got, which is at 12.3 million deficit at the moment, with a further 4.4 million of industrial action. So the paper talks about a 16.7 million deficit. So we're going to have that conversation in part 2 of the board, because we need to have a good discussion about that. The drivers are the same drivers that we see every week. There's a table in there. So industrial action, we've had some funding for industrial action. The industrial action costs, you have to remember there are other costs associated with industrial action. It's not just industrial action costs. So it impacts on escalation beds, it impacts on agency, it impacts on the amount we can deliver in efficiencies. And then there's other cost pressures such as inflation. So it's not saying that all of our issues financially this year are caused by industrial action. They're not. We would probably been struggling anyway, because we had quite an ambitious plan with a lot of risk in it anyway. So we can't just say it's all industrial action, but need to say industrial action has hampered us, and it has hampered us making some of those improvements that we would like to have been on the journey this year, that would then be impacting us next year, which makes next year harder as well. We have got quite high misses on the efficiency, the cost improvement programs and the quick and the ICB. They are impacted by the amount of engagement you can get with clinicians, because they've been planning for strikes, in strikes, or then recovering from strikes. We continue to have the issues on agency. We are making progress on agency. So one of the high cost agency providers, we've eliminated that now, I believe. We don't use that anymore, which is great. Well, good news financially. And then also the rate card that we pay on our bank as well, we're beginning to bring that down to the level that would be expected nationally as well, and that's providing some benefits as well. In terms of the ICB itself, this is an ICB board meeting. Prescribing in PHC, again, it's the same issues. The numbers just change every month. They get slightly larger. So in prescribing, we're sort of just 7.5 million over plan. That includes the impact of no cheaper stock obtainable. That's where we run out of stock nationally, so you have to have some other more expensive drug. Last year we got funding for that to recognise that. This year we're not, so we're having to suck it up. So that's part of the reason why we're under pressure this year. And then the other one is the personal health commissioning. At the moment, it's running 25% higher in terms of the finances than what we spent last year as well. We are trying to offset that as best we can non-recurrently. It equates at the moment to an expected £34 million increase on what we spent last year. Multitude of reasons. There's price increases, there's higher acuity, there is slightly higher numbers as well. But really the acuity and the price increases are the two main drivers of that. So that's sort of a quick run through of the financial position across the system.
Thank you very much, Rob. And I know the productivity and performance committee met yesterday, and we can pick up anything that came out of that when we go into the part 2 session later. But are there any questions or comments now? Okay, so let's move on then to the last of the regular reports, which is the system performance report. Again, we've had some indications to some of the things that we're doing in relation to performance, but I'll hand over to you, Dean, to take us through.
Thank you very much. Can I also go back to the action item as well, kind of?
Yes. Yes.
Because Neil and I have been discussing this because it's come from kind of a meeting that we had some time ago. I think one of our first board meetings, and Neil's got kind of an update on that position. So if I can just hand over to him for that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So Neil, do you want to pick that up?
Thank you, and I'll keep it brief because it is brief. So the request stroke challenge from the board, indeed from the people of Dorset, it came from the patient story, was the challenge of navigating our system and the fact that there are multiple access points, and all too often citizens get, or perceive they get bounced from one to the other, with no one really taking responsibility for them other than telling them, sorry, we can't help with that, try calling this, and bouncing round and round, intense frustration and obviously some real detriment to care. So you can tell when I sort of put my hand up for it how naive I was. Yep, we can sort that out in a year. Oh, the wry smiles that came from some of the people who've been around a little bit longer than I. Having said that, the way we've looked at this, because it's sort of how do you sort of eat the elephant one bite at a time. Some of the work and the model, what we've done is the work we've done is already been going on around the women's health hub, and that will come up later in the agenda. But in the women's health hub, what we've actually looked at, and the work being done, is to look at the whole range of services that are provided to that cohort. How can we streamline those services? Specifically, how can we make sure that for people utilising that group of services, we can make a better experience, reduce the repetition, reduce the risk of being bounced one from the other. So, given that work, the learnings from that, and it is ongoing, what we are planning to do is to use that as a model of how we approach other parts of the system. And rather than taking the whole elephant in one chunk and saying we're going to provide a single access for everyone in Dorset to the whole of the sort of service that are provided by the voluntary sector, local authorities, the NHS, we're going to learn from that model and then think, how can we expand that to others? So rather than a single point of access, there should be a single point of access, a number of single point of access, depending on different populations and subpopulations within Dorset. So the plan and what's actually happening is to learn from that model and then see how we can learn the lessons from that, and this is in the Women's Health Hub, and then perhaps consider rolling that across to two different cohorts, whether that be children and young persons, whether that be the elderly. But I think the reality is that a single point of access, although obviously a destination and a vision, is not going to be something that, and I put my hands up, can be solved in the short term. Nor do I think, given deeper understanding about how much effort it will involve and how much resource it will involve, nor would I recommend to the board that it should be one of our priorities in the next 12 sort of 18 months, but rather we pick that challenge out group by group. So it's a sort of brief verbal update on the approach we're taking and the learnings from considering this.
Neil, can I suggest maybe that we take this outside of board, because I don't recall that as the discussion that we had at the time. I don't think the discussion was that we should have a single point of access. My recollection around the discussion was that if a member of the public is using a service and they say A, B, C or D, that rather than the individual saying to them, I can't help you, try this, try that, that actually what might be useful is for each of our services to have a single point of contact at another service that they can then contact that person and say, I've got this person, they're asking for that, where do I refer them, so that they actually get referred to a place that can help rather than feeling that they're being bounced around the system. So I think it's slightly different to perhaps the work that you're doing. So let's take it outside of the meeting.
Thank you.
Look to see how we can do this in a way that is meaningful and doable. Because I agree with you, you can never have a single point of contact. But it is one of the issues that also came up in the board story that we had earlier, wasn't it?
Indeed.
The analysis that they did with children and families. So let's come back to that. Okay, back to you then.
Thank you. Come back to the performance report. Kind of in writing this report, kind of, I think there is much to feel positive about. We have been over the months that we've had, we've been reporting kind of where we've not been meeting the targets and the challenges that we've had, and that's certainly the discussions that we've had in the productivity and performance committee. But now, if you look at the operating standards that we're delivering, of the ones, there are 21 of those that we're now achieving those. It's only kind of 2 months ago when we were here, when we're only saying that we're meeting 9 of those. So the focus that we've had on that, on the performance during the year, is now paying dividends. And I think I want to acknowledge that and kind of celebrate that as well, because I think kind of in a quarter ago, it was feeling like we weren't making too much progress. But I think all of the effort that we put in, the deep dives that we've done in the what was the Finance and Performance Committee and the Productivity and Performance Committee, is really starting to pay off, because we've seen how some of those numbers have changed over the year. Having said that, there are 18 areas, 9 of which are 18 that we're not achieving, but 9 of which are improving. But there are 9 others that are deteriorating. So kind of unlike kind of a usual kind of performance report and the doom and gloom that and the problems that I report, I think this time it's something to celebrate. But clearly we need to look at those areas where we're not kind of making progress in. So over the year, we started out with those operating plan targets. Over the year, it's become a smaller set of those indicators have become more important. And we went through the second half of the year planning process, where that was brought down to a smaller number on things like virtual wards, that we were aiming for 360 by the end of the year. We're probably not going to get to 360, but we've moved from where we were at the time and making good progress towards that. Long waiters, we were looking to hit 0.78 waiters. The industrial action has knocked us off course on that, but we when we were here 2 months ago, we were looking at something between 100 and 150 that would be 78-week waiters. We're now looking at kind of around about 50. So 53 is our best guess now of where we've got. They're in a range of specialties. Some are patient choice as well, so they've gone over. But the 2 biggest specialties that's causing us the problem is in orthopedics and gynecology. On 65-week waiters, our plan said that we would be at 1,053 by the end of the year. We look like we're on track with that. There is one nuance within the numbers as well, because there has been a change of counting during the second half of the year. So it's community paediatrics. But even when you allow for that, we're still on track for delivering it. And just to make sure that we don't lose those issues with community paediatrics and linking back to some children's agendas that we've discussed previously and here, we're still going to be counting those and monitoring those as if they were inside the target. So I don't want us to lose the fact that just because we counted it nationally, they're being counted differently, we won't lose the focus on it. The 4-hour standard in A&E has moved up the agenda quite significantly, and the amount of focus and daily performance management there is now on that is kind of focusing everyone's attention on it. During January and February, we delivered 73% against the 76% standard. For March, we're not quite as good as that. It's been a difficult start to the month, and we are currently at, I think it's 67% for the first 5 days of the month. There's daily calls with regional and national team on that. The faster diagnosis standard, you'll recall that it was skin cancer referrals and the amount of volume that was coming through that was knocking us off course. We haven't got the final January figures yet, but the provisional data that we've got says that we are on track for that, and we deliver that, and we expect to maintain that to the end of the year. The category 2 response times for Dorset, we are within the 30 minutes, and the ambulance handover time. But I think, as we've always discussed here, the no criteria to reside figure is the single biggest issue that we've got across Dorset. There is a lot of work going on with it. We've got support now through the Better Care Fund. That's a programme that is just about to start for that. It is something that everybody across the system, and Siobhan mentioned earlier the great the improvement that we've seen in the system working, certainly in the urgent emergency care space and the discharge planning. That is an area where that is really demonstrable, that we can see the work that there is between the partners.
Okay, thank you. So Alison, you've got your hand up first.
Yeah, sorry, apologies. I've actually been trying to lower my hand and it won't go down. So, but it was so I won't come in at that point. It was really just a comment about Neil's wish for the single point of access and the ask of the clinical networks, which you have as a paper for information late on in the pack. But as I said, my hand won't go down. So if I do need to come back in, Jenny, I will wave.
Siobhan?
Oh, it's gone down. Thank you. Thank you.
I suppose I just want to sort of assure the board within the provider trust, Nick and I, we're like absolutely on a sprint to year end around urgent and emergency care and also all the waiting times and elective targets. And it is quite incredible, really. I suppose from my perspective, having been here, just under 2 years now, the flow in UHD is the best that it's been since I've been here. So I can currently report that our SDECs, our same day emergency care areas, are not bedded, and that actually we have flow, which is quite incredible. So we'll see where we get to by the end of March, but there's a lot of ambition to try and get to wherever we need to by the end of the month. And we're working with partners on that.
Well done, Siobhan, because that's pretty significant. So well done for that. I've got Dan and then Gillian.
Mine's more just a placeholder for when we come on later in the agenda to look at operational planning for next year, that we make sure that there's a reconciliation between these performance issues that we've seen over the course of the year improving and what we're planning for next year. Because sometimes as a board, I don't think we make the link clearly between planning and performance. And so it's a placeholder comment.
Yeah. Thank you, Gillian.
Thanks. I wanted to comment on the no criteria to reside piece, which Dean brought out, and I agree it's an absolute priority for us across the system to tackle that. I had a fantastic visit to UHD supported by Siobhan a couple of weeks ago, where we did a patient journey, didn't we, right from the front door all the way through, and that really brought to life what that looks like. And you know, we spent some time sitting down talking to one of the discharge coordinators who's dealing with the challenges of this day in, day out, and trying to understand what the issues are. And I came away just with the sense that we're only going to solve this by getting that. We talked about we earlier, that sense of we across that system. So I'm encouraged to hear Dean thinks that we're getting there to some extent. I'm sure there's more to do, but we're as focused on it as anyone.
Thank you. That's really helpful to hear as well. So okay, so that takes us to the break. So we are 10 minutes behind time. So if we can resume at 11:55, please, and then pick up on the agenda. Thank you very much. Okay, I think we're ready to go. Thank you very much. I hope everybody had an opportunity to have a short break. That takes us to the committee escalation reports. I'm going to go to the chairs of each of the committees, but can I ask you to assume your escalation report as read, and for you to just focus on anything overarching that you think you want to say from your last committees. So the first person I'm going to go to is Cecilia for the Integrated Care Partnership escalation report.
Thanks, Jenny. Yes, I think as you say, most things are there. To pull out the fact that we had someone from the NET coming and talking about labour market data, I think was quite useful to partners to understand the issue around unemployment, the issues around the recruitment issues beyond just health and care. So that was really quite a useful session that we had. And housing, just to say, we had the housing conference, which was on the 27th February, really well attended, brought out some very interesting issues around the connection not only between housing and health, but housing, health and the economy and the wider economy on that. So that was a very well supported meeting, and we will continue with the housing roundtable work on that, but possibly put alongside that another group that's going to look at the financing and funding. Social mobility, I think it will remain on our agenda, but Sam presented the smoking cessation program as an example of again partnership working, which I think was well received, and it was felt that hypertension was another one that could go easily alongside of that. So I think the ICP is working well together as a partnership. We're getting good attendance at those meetings, good discussions. And I think the other discussion we had there was the anchor institution work as well, which I think. So, I think, any questions, anyone?
Questions or comments for Cecilia?
It's just around the smoking cessation. You may not know the answer. I just wondered how the comms around, particularly the issue around vaping. So obviously for committed smokers, vaping is a really good thing, but for children and young people, it's something that we really want to eradicate, isn't it?
Yes.
So I just did you get a sense of the comms being nuanced enough around that?
I think we had a discussion around that. Absolutely, that question was raised, as you know, and I think there is still some people who want vaping to be banned completely for the reasons that you described. But I think the way that Sam described it as being as if you don't smoke, don't vape. But if you do smoke, vaping is a safer option and a transition into not smoking. And actually being very, very strict around stopping young people starting. So if you don't smoke, you don't vape, don't start. Do we need to do more comms? Yes, I think we do need to do more comms. I think we are trying to get closer with the engagement team to work out how to do more comms around a lot of these subjects. I don't think we necessarily are joined up as much as we could be around another.
Yeah, because it's a nuanced message. It needs to be a strong message for committed smokers, but it equally needs to be something that is helping with that children and young people challenge, because there are harms for that group that haven't started smoking.
Indeed so, and yes, if I see mum vaping, well, and that must be safe, yes, we've got to try and get to a world where it's all stopped. But at this point, I think you're right.
Oh no, it absolutely has its place. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute we don't need nicotine replacement therapies, including vaping. It's just it's the comms bit really I'm talking about, because it is nuanced.
Well, it'd be interesting as we roll it out to get some feedback and see if it's working, and maybe we need to adjust it as well.
Okay, Lisa, I'm going to come to you as chair of the People Engagement and Culture Committee.
So thank you. Yeah, assuming the paper's read, I think there are two things that I want to focus on in this report, and they're the two decisions that were made by the committee. The first one is that we've got our development workshop on the 25th of March. So we extended the invitation to everyone around the table if you have any views on content or attendance, both are going to be really important, then please chat to Dawn or myself, and that invitation is of course extended to everyone around this table as well. So do come and see us if you want any more detail on that. With the caveat though, I think this is the beginning of a conversation, not the entire conversation. So we're taking quite a chilled approach to this because there are lots of questions to answer. We will answer some of them. We will definitely not answer all of them, but we will continue the conversation and we'll hold ourselves to the discipline of continuing the conversation for the effectiveness of this committee. So that's simply worth saying. The second thing is the committee saw the ICB equality delivery system data and refreshed equality objectives for 2024-2025. They will be published on the ICB's website. So we got sight of those, but when we got sight of them, and this is really important for this afternoon because this agenda item is coming to you later, it wasn't quite finished. There was still some data gaps. There was some ratification that had to be done by some of our partners. And the scores were provisional. We were still waiting for the absolute on the scores and the scoring. So I think when you see that paper, recognise that it's not exactly the same as the paper that we saw, but it's very, very close. But I think we probably for governance due diligence need to say that. And we did agree, I don't want to preempt Fran's agenda item this afternoon, but we did agree that this is a transition year for that, and we noted that in committee. And there do need to be some improvements next year. So I think when we discuss that, I think let's bear that in mind. This is a transition year, and we already have a list of improvements that we want to see. And we want to achieve with that report next year. And the final thing on that agenda item is language, really. It's going on the website, so it's really important that it makes sense and that it's a shop window, really, for what we do in terms of equality. So it's really important that it's meaningful and it's very understandable. So that's all I've got to say, really, on those two issues. And I think they are the two that I would like to gently nudge your attention to from that.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments for Lisa? And then we then go to Dan as the chair of the Productivity and Performance Committee.
Well, thank you. Have you? You'll go on.
Yeah, you go anywhere and I'll be back.
I'll be brief, John. I'll take the paper as read, and the main items of the meeting are the performance report and the finance update, which the board has had. I pull out two bits. The PMP met yesterday as a special meeting. I expect we'll cover more of that in part two. And then we started a conversation. Echo what Lisa said, start the conversation at the end of what do we mean by productivity and what does that mean for Dorset and the people who live here and us as a system. And I suspect that needs to be iterative. I think David made the point in the committee, but I might be attributing to the wrong person, that let's be iterative, but let's be fast, because we want to get on with it as once we've defined it. And so there's more work for the committee to do on that. And that's all I was going to cover, Chair.
Okay. Any questions or comments for Dan? Apologies, Jonathan, for overlooking your paper. So if we can go to Jonathan as chair of the Prevention, Equity and Outcomes Committee.
So this was our second meeting, and we used it just to understand the landscape of prevention and health inequalities in Dorset, and also start to differentiate between maybe what we call primary prevention interventions like obesity and smoking, secondary interventions like cardiovascular interventions and disease prevention, and maybe a third area, maybe environmental ones like housing and things like that. And we're going to do more of that next time as part of the plan that we agreed, just understand what the landscape is, what's actually going on. And we set a challenge to Kate's team and the prevention team to actually start thinking about what kind of report we can bring up to the board, which shows exactly what we're doing across all of those areas holistically, to actually raise the profile and start trying to give us an understanding of how all this groups together, what effect it's trying to have, and also what resources we're putting into it and what return on investment we're getting out of these programs. I think this community, this board needs to have that sort of clear understanding of what's going on, to understand where it needs to shift and what it needs to do and where it's getting its best bangs for the bucks. Yeah, and that's it. And we'll continue with that agenda for a couple more meetings, I think.
Thank you. Cecilia?
I think I just want to know, how do we make sure that we connect with between the work that you've done, some of the outcomes that you're discussing, and the ICP? Because obviously, as these prevention programs are identified, or how do we then make sure that they're further socialised beyond perhaps what the work you're already doing?
Fine question. I think the first step is to create that landscape and picture it.
Yeah.
See what we're doing at the moment, and I mean, I didn't know about the this.
Yes.
There's all sorts of things you draw together and say, okay, we're already doing all of this, and these are what all these programs are trying to achieve. And then I think the ICP and the ICB need to sort of get together and say, well, okay, how do we actually make that more efficient? How does it fit into the next strategy and things like that? What do you want to fund? So it's a long-term program. Just communicating.
Yes. Yeah.
And I guess that kind of links to the next one, which is Rhiannon's, the Quality Experience and Safety Committee, because ultimately it's the helicopter view of all of the committees as to whether or not we're having impact, isn't it? But anyway, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. And everyone else take the paper as read, but just to pull out a couple of things. Obviously, we did approve the quality report. I think one of the things that we've been hearing updates in terms of progresses being had in relation to integration of the quality and performance reporting. I think it is progressing, because I think I've seen it on a draft agenda for the next committee. I think very much saying we'd rather have something that we receive recognising the iterative nature that will need to take. So it's not about arriving with perfection personified, but let's be on that journey, which is great. We also received the draft clinical plan, prevention to palliation, and we are recommending it for approval to the board. But I think just to, I suppose, challenge ourselves in terms of a couple of pathways that are chosen, our understanding, because Alison explained that the clinical networks will be, let's say, the mechanism by which those pathways, or the those pathways will be worked out, and recommend how they'll be implemented. I think we need to challenge ourselves that the clinical plan's called itself prevention to palliation, so those pathways need to reflect that and demonstrate that. So I think there's connectivity again into what does that really mean. And Alison, I'm sure, will come in to say anything to add to this, but I think part of that is not the clinical networks as they currently are. It's refreshing those networks so that they've got the right people to kind of help with the right conversations to move in a different direction, I guess. We approved the system quality group terms of reference. We received the biannual safeguarding report, which was a positive report in terms of taking assurance, but I think there was a recognition that we wouldn't want to sit on our laurels, and we really want to keep pushing in the effectiveness of our arrangements across the system in relation to safeguarding. And I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments?
You talk about you received a learning disability and autism host commissioner guidance and gap analysis. I have absolutely no idea what that could actually do.
So that might need to turn to Debbie with. So there is new guidance that came out. In fact, Dean, you might know some of this. And there's new guidance that came out, so we were updated on that by the person who was leading on it. From what we understood, actually, there wasn't very big implications for Dorset with this particular piece of work, and so it wasn't a very long conversation, to be honest, because it was there was no gaps particularly identified for Dorset currently in terms of that guidance. I'm not saying there's no gaps per se, okay, but in terms of that guidance, yeah.
Okay, we move on. So John, as Chair of Risk and Audit Committee.
Yes, certainly. Good afternoon, everybody. So we had our Risk and Audit Committee on the 22nd of February, and we were reflecting the two time horizons that I think we've spoken about today. So in terms of the current financial year and how we approach the year end, the first thing we did is we reviewed and looked at a set of the key judgments that we'd have to make as we approach the end of this financial year. We looked at our current risk register as it was set up in this financial year, and then we also received reports from external audit as well about how we'll go through the external reporting process and actually lead to a part one conversation in September, where we have our annual report and accounts, and they are presented in public at this meeting in September. So we studied all of that business. We then also looked forward in time, and we received a really important paper that we'll see today in part two, where we looked at our board assurance framework. That is the way in which we look forward in time and say, what are the key issues that we're confronting here at NHS Dorset, and how will we have our hand on the tiller, if you like, in terms of taking the organisations through that agenda. So we'll be receiving the board assurance framework. That was the longest session that we had at our session, and actually one of the things we were trying to do is to calibrate our risk appetite. And one of the things we'll pick up in part two is a recommendation on our risk appetite as it's been presented and gathered to date, but we'll also pick up on a particular matter that relates to one of those dimensions about our appetite for thinking about regulatory risk. So those are the key things that we talked about, Jenny.
Thanks.
Any questions?
Any questions? Okay, and then last but not least, the Strategic Objectives Committee, which is Kate.
Thank you. This was the second meeting of this new committee, and we're still working through some of the processes which will support the committee, as you can see by the work on terms of reference and things, but we're getting there on all of that. The key things I think we were focusing on was firstly the 5-year forward plan, which is on the agenda for today, so I won't course any of the issues about that one, and the new strategic portfolio management office and the gateway process. The key issue here is to rationalise various projects that are going on across the system, and which will include stopping those that are not delivering. The intention is that this should be a rigorous approach in future to approving these various projects to make sure that they will be effective and have impact. And the committee was concerned that when this process comes into place, we must make sure that it is not too procedurally unwieldy, that it is agile, and that it is absolutely outcomes driven, because we must make sure that the kind of things that we are putting money and time into are delivering on what's happening there. And that will be something we will be watching very closely in the future. And that was the key element, really, I think, from our point of view moving forward, that process is now there and that we need to make sure that it does deliver as we would hope.
Thank you. So any questions or comments for Kay? Dan?
Kay gets the award for the most focused escalation report. I know it's that's a good thing. My actual question was just about income generation, really important and something we should be looking at. Where and how do we consider the opportunity cost of that and resource prioritisation? Because by focusing our resources on that, they won't be doing something else. I'm not saying it's a thing we shouldn't be doing, but it's the opportunity cost of where we spend effort, how we generate income, and what then we do with the cost base. And I just wanted to make sure that perhaps in that committee, and we were thinking about kind of opportunity costs, whilst absolutely trying to generate all the revenue that we can.
Yeah, I think that's something which underpins a lot of the work that Ash is doing here. I mean, firstly, they need to generate the income to pay for their own actions, and that whole system is self-funding in that sense. They have to make sure that. But there's a lot of interesting discussion going around, which Lisa is involved in as well, with regard to trying to tap into some funding from other areas that are more socially focused, in the sense of supporting a lot of our vision and aims going forward. And so that kind of process, I think, is absolutely essential to resolve some of the issues we've got about how we fund our transformation process, because now we haven't got any money. And so we need to be doing that. So I understand what you're saying about the money and the opportunities and the balancing of it out. At the minute, I think it's reasonably well balanced, but that's because we haven't gone very far yet to the point that there's really too much time spent on it. So we'll see how it goes as it goes on. It's one of those things as a new committee, we're seeing things here that in the past we weren't exposed to, and that we need to see where we're going on it.
It is maybe something we could pick up offline, because there's the transformation budget piece and then the core budget, and just making sure that we're tied together.
Yeah. But there are some of the projects that we're looking at could have significant impact on a lot of our transformation funding, and if we can get income to support that from outside the budget, then that's going to make a big difference.
I think just from, sorry, go on, Rachel.
Well, no, I suppose just to the latter point, I think it's also just, it goes back to the productivity efficiency discussion in terms of being absolutely clear about the investment benefits and how it drives your kind of your deliverables over the next few years and in the long term as well. Yeah, I think in terms of that link across in terms of how it translates is really, really critical.
Take it through the gate process.
And I was going to say that for me, I think one of the things coming out of the committee escalation reports is that we're starting to mature into a wider role as an ICB. And that's for me what is coming out in the committee report. So the whole thing around prevention, productivity, just how we start shifting that dial, how we focus on the outcomes and how we step up the pace on that. And that's not to say the other bits that we do, which is the performance management of the NHS isn't important. Of course it is. And that's a key part of what we do. But we also know we've got these other bits. So that's starting to come through with the committee reports. So I would encourage you all as chairs to carry on that journey actually to help get us there. Okay, let's move us on then, because one of the things that we're required to do as an ICB is to have a joint 5-year forward plan. And Neil, you've been leading on that for us, and you've got the paper here today to talk about how the refresh is being done. So over to you.
Thank you. And I've also got a really hard stop at 12:30, which I'm going to push to 12:35. Otherwise, I'm going to be late for taking someone to a clinic appointment, which will not go down well with the hospital nor the parties. So at pace, thank you for reading this report. I'm going to talk very briefly because I know that people have read and got comments. The challenge that we've had, where you can see outlined in the paper what the purpose is, and I'm going to basically update the board on the timeline and approach to update the joint forward plan. The requirement from NHS England guidance is to have a revised plan in. The recommendation is the end of March. We and the recommendation to this board, we're going to do what the majority of other ICBs are doing, are pushing that out, because for all the reasons that we know, the current issues, getting engagement, getting the support, the work that needs to be done across the system and with engagement across the system would be too rushed to do it within that timeline. So I'll go to the bottom of the paper and then come back up. You'll see the timeline that we're pushing out to make sure we get the proper engagement. One of the key things in the NHS England guidance, which they've really reiterated this year, is that the plan, the joint forward plan and the work for the ICSs has to be truly integrated. It has to be collaboration. It has to be built as a system. And we haven't been able to get enough of the engagement and the work we want to get this done in the end of March. So that's the first key thing. And I wanted to sort of draw attention to that because it's important. What we've got to do in the revised plan is to build on the current year's strengths and the delivery plan, look back, what's in flight programmes, business as usual, as well as looking forward to what we're going to specifically do, and also to highlight what's going to be new and different. That obviously is not something that a small group of people do. That requires the engagement across the system, across the stakeholders, and we have not made the progress I wanted to make on that. The section 3.4, if I can jump to that, in the paper, summarises the key steps. So there's lots of work, lots of meeting, and I'm just going back to that point. We can't do this in isolation, and this is sort of partly of where we are, but also the request that we're going to be doing is coming around to get more engagement. It's it's the timings, I think, partly, and the focus on the here and now has meant we struggled to get into people's diaries. So there's going to be a request coming back, and I'm sort of putting it to the board as well, that we've, for example, all stakeholders and partners have to review their plans, provide an update on progress, impact and trajectories. We've got to have meetings with regional teams as well as our local organisations. In section 4, I've just outlined the outline sort of summary and timetable of key tasks. You see the work that's got to be done in there. The other key aspect is to, in our joint forward plan, in the plan, and more importantly, the work we're going to do, is to really lean in and bring forward into 24-25 as many of the things we can do that are going to make a difference to the issues that are affecting the system now. So whilst, of course, and I was sort of going to come in when our colleagues from the council were talking about their children work, of course this is long term, of course we need to hold our nerve. You don't transform and change things in a couple of years, but we are focusing on priorities that we believe and that the data shows will make a difference to the pressures across the system, and the acutes especially, in the shorter term, i.e. 24-25, and reaching out for 18 months. Because I think that's going to be important, not only in meeting the challenge and providing better solutions for the people of Dorset, but also to maintain the trust in this work, because when it's such a long way out, it can be really hard to keep the focus and the engagement and the belief in it. Finally, the other thing that sort of in the report, it's sort of threaded almost between the words and not stressed outright, is the need to stop things. We still are stopping hardly anything, and yet asking to change and do more. So when we focus on things we're going to do, we're going to have to be, I think, much tougher as a system on stopping things. We've already mentioned it, and Jenny just mentioned it, the gateway process is going to be fundamental. So as we focus down, decide the priorities for the next year and the years out after that, they will be going through the gateway process. And a key part of the gateway process is absolute clarity on the outcomes that will be measured, using, of course, DICE and the data we have, because otherwise we will not be able to keep the board, or indeed the people of Dorset, informed of where we're going and the progress we're making. The other thing that's going to be really important in actually making a difference rather than talking about it is revising an operating model. So when we looked at the joint forward plan and what we needed to do, I think we realised that some of the ways we're working need to be revised and updated, and that work has already started. And then the final key aspect of making this reality is having the Strategic Portfolio Management Office, so we've got a single view of the truth as we move forward. I'll stop there because it's better to have the questions and people have read the paper.
Okay, really conscious of time, so if we can just take any really kind of big pointed questions that we need to get to Neil before he gets off, because I don't want you to be late, Neil. So John and then Gillian.
I want to be really pithy with my thoughts. I think I do support this. The second thing I would say is it reads from, we have to do this for NHS England, and I think we need to do this for us. So from an articulation of where we are, that's the thing I really wanted to dial in. It's not a compliance need for this plan. I think it's because we need it. That's the second thing I wanted to say. I think it would be really, the third point I would say is that I think we need to have waypoints. So we're 9 months since the first version came out in July 23. So yeah, July 23. We're 9 months in. Are we on track? So I think the calibration in the final document that says nearly a year into the 5-year plan, are we on track with what we did last time? Because I'd like the learning to be in it. And whilst I do support the delegation to the chief executive, we should definitely bring it back here, is what I would say, because I think this is our plan for NHS Dorset. So those are my hopefully pithy points.
Gillian.
Thanks, and thanks, Neil. Really delighted that there's going to be a bit more time to engage in it. We have engaged in it already, but a bit more time allows us to properly engage with health and wellbeing boards, which I know is one of the stakeholders that are listed in there. So I'll follow up with Neil and the team about how best to do that. Just the point that Neil made that I hadn't picked out from the paper about a focus on what we can deliver for acutes in the short term. I absolutely understand the drivers for that and the importance of that, and I'm sure that must be in the plan, but I hope that that isn't everything that goes into the refresh. I think that we'd be missing a trick if we weren't showing how we develop place, integrating neighbourhoods, some of the things that I know the board is keen to.
Neil, I'm just going to go through. So I've got Rob next, and
Thank you.
Dan, then Lisa.
Thanks. So the piece on this one is when I look at the slide, and please don't take this the wrong way. This is about a lot of work to produce a document that we then publish with our population with good intentions. How are we going to do things? But the bit that's not in there, and it might not be there, but I'd just like us to be cognizant of this, because this, I think, where we're falling down is how do you actually do it? How do you deliver it? What are the mechanisms that we need to do to deliver it? Because the best way in the world, all of these processes about the metrics and things, we can design what we like. We can keep coming back and say we're not hitting it because we haven't actually figured out how we're going to deliver it. So for me, part of the issue that we're facing is that by putting the plans, it's how you actually enact the plans is the bit that potentially the board might need to kind of challenge us back a bit more on as officers to go and do.
I think that's exactly John's point about the break points, isn't it? So Siobhan.
Thank you. I mean, I do think this is sort of our USP as Dorset ICB, and I talked to this our induction within the trust, and we're also aligning it with what we're doing in our sort of improvement methodology in the organisation. But actually, I don't know if I've missed it, Neil, but you know, in terms of trajectories and any link with our financial challenges, at the moment, I don't see it. And I haven't been engaged, or I'm not sure many have yet, you know, that actually, in order to make this real, we need a really clear plan about what it does mean, almost probably to Rob's point, how we do this and what the milestones are in terms of delivery. And I sort of think we've got the document from last year, but I'm not sure how much we've actively all progressed it in the system.
And Dan and Lisa.
Have we got the title right? So I'm kind of thinking about 100 Voices and what it says on the tin. If we went out and talked to someone in the community, what would they interpret by a joint forward? Like, aren't all plans forward by their nature? And so I just think about engaging the population. Can we call it what it should say on the tin? And is there a better way to articulate what the plan's trying to do in terms of taking the population with us? Rhetorical question, but a question.
Lisa.
Yeah, I'm building on that really. Thanks, Dan. So a couple of things. I'd like to see a much longer horizon on this. Even in this presentation, I think this is about a 2 to 3 year process. And it would be really nice to see that long horizon, because that is actually how long this is going to take to even start the conversation, I think. So I recognise we're running to NHS England submission deadlines, but to John's point, that's not the point of this document. It's much broader than that, and I'd like to see that reflected in this document. Secondly, engagement isn't a bookend where you engage in February to consult and then you engage when you submit to sell it in, basically. Engagement is a spectrum that goes from inform at the beginning all the way through to ownership, and I suppose that comment sits also with a 2 to 3 year horizon, because what I'd like to see is this ceases to become our plan and it becomes a population plan, and we've done our engagement so well through that period. Actually, we don't own it anymore. We enable it, we facilitate it, we maybe monitor and evaluate it, but we don't own it, because unless we can shift from engagement to ownership, we will not achieve our goals.
Okay, you've got about 20 seconds. Neil, I'm not going to invite you in. I think you've heard all of the comments. And so you can take those away, and I'm sure amongst us as well, we can make sure that you've got all of that feedback. The thing I was going to go to is it does actually request delegation to the chief exec, but I think all of the comments are the board are saying that we need to own this, we need to do that. So I wonder if we don't do that and we find a time to bring this back so that the board can actually follow the journey and feel comfortable as to where we've got to with the sign off. Is that okay, Neil?
Yeah, it's more than okay, and also thank you for the comments, the challenges, the criticism. It's very clear. It was really good. These comments are very clear, very robust, and very directive. And I think the specific point I've heard, which is I'm wrestling with it, is like, how do we go from how we're doing it to what specifically what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And Siobhan's point, well, also that John made, where are the waypoints, where are the metrics, and also talking about the impact it has on finances, and not just for the acute. Gillian, I absolutely hear you, and I picked up that as an example, and it's always risky picking out one, and everyone says, what about my child, isn't it good looking as well? This is system working and the system approach. So those points are very well heard, and I look forward to coming back, working with everyone in the group, then coming back with a paper, more than a paper, an approach and a belief and a journey that picks up all those points and really gets the dial moving on this.
Yeah, an approach. I think that's exactly right. So thank you very much. I know you've got to get off. So
Thank you.
And we'll see you later. Thank you very
See you
much.
later.
Okay, so that takes us to the clinical plan. And Alison, that's over to you.
And thank you, Jenny. So we're in the process now where a number of you will have seen previous iterations of this plan previously. And we are now looking for the board to approve this to move to an implementation and widespread communication exercise, really, in terms of how we roll the principles out. The general rationale that sits behind how we've generated this plan is to ensure that there is read across all of our existing ICS documents and strategies and plans, so that there should be nothing in this that is jarring from, for example, the 5-year forward plan that we've just been discussing. The initial engagement, but this feels like it's been a really long time in gestation, and I apologise to the board for that. When we initially started the engagement piece around this and held the workshops to inform how this would develop, it was agreed that rather than coming up with very prescriptive guidance about how individual services should be designed and delivered, is that this was about putting into place a number of principles which actually could be used as a guide, as a template across any service, whether it referred to children, whether it referred to adults, whether it was around physical health or mental health. And I think what's been really refreshing listening to the conversations this morning is I think every single conversation we've had around the system working and the join up of care and people not telling a story multiple times or getting caught between different services with slightly different criteria were absolutely the things that fed into the decision making that has generated this plan. And so we have 5 key principles which sit along as the overarching piece of the plan around prevention and early intervention, around making services equitable and fair and inclusive, and to tackle inequalities, considering health and social and wider needs together, and deciding care around home. These were all sort of individual, and we've sort of bundled them to get them to 5. So I apologise for that. Looking at how we use guidance and data to drive the development of services, and how we really move to that sort of not just prevention and early intervention, but empowerment of our population to manage their own health, and give them the tools to do that. And as part of the bundle around the clinical plan, you've got a couple of other documents which relate to Dorset clinical networks, and it really is anticipated that the Dorset clinical networks will become the delivery arm of this. And networks at the moment come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. We have some that are nationally supported and mandated. We have some that are regionally mandated and supported. We have some which are relatively loose collaborations, often of secondary care clinicians, which so therefore not representing the whole pathway, and those are often unfunded and done on goodwill. But if we're actually going to get these networks to do the very ambitious list of tasks, any services are operating within that now, but also having their eye on the transformation and strategy of what needs to be happening there. And we're going to have to ensure that those are supported. and that means that we have to be a little bit selective about how we choose which networks that we would put our support behind at any one time. And so I think we see a sort of jumping in and jumping out process potentially for networks depending on their priorities. And within the paper there are a number of things that we've suggested, maybe tools or suggestions that would indicate where we might want to put our resources. For this next coming year, we have identified 3 networks and for slightly different reasons. One, cardiovascular prevent, because that is absolutely a priority. It's got an existing board, which actually I think can transform fairly seamlessly into a network. We have a really good respiratory network, but that is one of those which actually is a very effective network, but doesn't really have any official support. And neurology, which we're really following on from the neurology network board, the neurology working group that was established in response to the concerns raised by the coroner, and where it identified that there were a number of pieces of work that really needed to continue and to take that service forward as a Dorset-wide provided service. In addition to that, we will almost certainly add diabetes, and that is because the working board there is just finishing up with outstanding work, and we will have been and there is national allocation of funds specifically for diabetes leadership, and so that is one that we will almost certainly sort of pick up as well. That's quite a lot, so I'm going to stop there now and just you sort of take any questions or comments from people. I have received a number of comments, and they will be included in the final version around reporting and oversight. Thank you.
Okay, so I might need to come back to you to understand how we do that, because it is actually here for approval today, isn't it? So
yes.
So okay, let's take Siobhan and then Ben and then Rhiannon.
Hi, Alison, thank you. And it's good, it's quite a clear, succinct sort of report. I've been really struck this morning at the regional meeting of chief execs. Chris Whitty came and presented his most recent report. And actually, I know we're focused on prevention and early intervention, but it might be quite good in terms of, with strategies, trying to forward the language a little bit. He talks about delaying progression of disease and illness, and actually that being such a significant thing for communities such as ours in a sort of rural coastal community. And I just really think it might be worth us being upstream in our thinking and considering how we build that into this. The other part that I think is missing as a key value, bearing in mind where we are in Dorset, is affordability or value, however we want to describe it. But I do think in Dorset we need to reference the fact that in our clinical strategy we need to be considering sort of best value for the system, and I didn't quite see it in there. I welcome the work on networks. We've just got to think about how they align with everything else.
Yeah, thank you, Siobhan. And I think in trying to decrease the number of priorities or principles, I think probably that best value has slightly got lost.
Can I take a few comments, because otherwise it's just going to take a long time to get through. So
yeah, of course, Jenny. Sorry,
I've got Ben and Rhiannon next, and then I'll take some more after that. So Ben.
Thank you. Yes, I'll be brief. So I fully support this concept of the Dorset Clinical Networks, and I think that idea of addressing the whole pathway is so key to that, and actually the inclusion of primary care and what happens before the sort of step up to the acute is vital. I suppose I just flag a concern I have from primary care in terms of how we're going to engage in those clinical networks in terms of, it's a funding issue for us. I suspect that we're going to really struggle, I think, in primary care to ensure the right people attend those networks. So I appreciate it's a small issue, but I flag it now because it's going to be key to have genuine primary care representation in each of those clinical networks.
Thank you. So I've got Rhiannon, Dawn, Nick and John.
Two quick points. First one very much relates to what Siobhan said. I suppose it's just that understanding of the intersection in terms of how far upstream. So the diabetes one is a really good example, because actually the thing that's going to bring the trajectory of diabetes down is the prevention of obesity. So is the plan to kind of join forces with whoever's working on obesity prevention and reduction into this pathway work? That's one question. The other one is a governance point, because I probably didn't emphasise it in my update. So within the terms of reference of the Quality Experience and Safety Committee, the clinical plan, that committee does have a remit of oversight in terms of the progress then of this particular plan. So just wanted to, it wasn't referenced in the paper, so I just want to make sure we're clear on that point. Thank you.
Go on.
Thank you, and Alison, thank you. And I'm also going to jump on the clinical networks, and it's great to hear you amplify the points in 2.3 and 2.4 in the paper. There's something about the massive impact that these clinical networks can have in both the here and now, how they support the development of sustainable clinical models, which will give us sustainable workforce models that are that we can actually afford, the role that they play now. And then if I link that to the previous paper around the joint forward plan and the ask of the board around the need for an approach, then of course the clinical networks are vital in getting us to that point. So it's a comment and I guess to take away, how are we going to get those clinical networks really quickly helping us address the problems that we have right now, as well as the as the future stuff? Thank you.
Okay. Nick?
Yes, so I was going to make the same point as Siobhan around I guess the kind of the value and how we're measuring that. We've got our 5 outcomes within the forward plan. We've got Neil kicked off a whole kind of value delivery program, which started to come up with some different metrics. We just need to make sure, I think we've got some real clarity over the value added piece, and really linked, I think, to the work we're doing within the population health space as well. It just doesn't seem connected at the moment. I was going to make a similar point about remit to Dawn, but maybe sort of slightly contrary to that, saying actually, is there a decision to be made? Because it doesn't seem clear to me about whether this is performance management or transformation, and I think it just needs to be really clear what the clinical networks in particular are focusing on, because you typically need different people to do slightly different things, and I think if there isn't that clarity, it can become a bit unfocused. And if my chief medical officers were here, they would both be talking about the importance of program and administrative resource to be able to actually drive these forward. And I think that is absolutely a prerequisite for all of these clinical networks. So setting them up without dedicated resource is setting them up to fail. And I would absolutely stress that, and I would really focus on that point if we want them to be a success. And then the final thing I would just make the point on is we have got clinical acute networks under the provider collaborative, but I would see these absolutely working into wider clinical networks in particular. So really aligning into the two, because they are focusing on the acute element, and we need to genuinely think about that whole pathway bit.
Okay, and then John and Rachel and Cecilia.
Okay, to make it additive, just on the networks piece, I think there's something that is probably implicit, but I think it should be explicit. There's quite a lot of attention should be paid to particular roles. I think we should also dial up diversity of background, experience, and cognitive approach, because there's got to be some really key thinking that needs to come through in here. And whilst it probably is implicit, I think it's one of our explicit goals and expectations at the ICB. So if we could add that.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that, John. I didn't quite hear what you said.
I think it would be great if we could make explicit the expectation of diversity of background, experience, and cognitive diversity when people are appointed onto the networks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, just to note that the system is also a co-partner in the operational delivery networks and specialised commissioning. Because you would say that, but actually, they are funded and they have specific work programmes, and they are presented to the joint committee, of which this ICB is again has a place at the table. So I think it would be good to think about how we weave that into the overall, so that again you're recognising the wider networks and how they play in.
Cecilia?
My only comment was basically who's going to pay for these? Are they going to go through the gate process? Are they going to be screened as being, this is the outcome we want, these are the resources we're going to apply to this new way of working? Because it would seem to me that if we've got a process in which that we say we're going to put these things through, because otherwise I'd say the point that I think Nick made was, if we don't put the resources behind it and it's going to need resources, how are they going to be successful?
Okay, quite a lot of comments there, and this paper is here for approval, and I know it has been through various processes before. So, David, do you want to come in now, or shall I bring Alison in to respond? And do you want to come in after her?
No, let me sort of try. So I was going to make the comment exactly as you started to introduce there, that this has gone through a huge amount of consultation and engagement with clinical teams and managerial teams and operational teams and so on to get it to this point. It's actually been quite impressive the way it's done. So I'm curious about why there are gaps in knowledge. Presumably it's been to your teams rather than to colleagues here directly. Maybe that's the gap. But I think it's for us to consider whether we can take assurance from that process that this has got into a place where when it connects back with the system, there will be support for making it happen and for it to roll out. So I'll just hold that there for a moment. The other thing to say around the specific clinical networks is that I don't think it's come out in the discussion, and I don't think I've heard it, but what we have said is that we're not going to launch all of them. We're going to pick one or two that are linked absolutely to our priorities for the coming year. And if they're in the priorities for the coming year, they will be resourced, because that's how we extract the benefits. And then when they've done their task for the year, because we know they will, they'll stand down and we'll invest in the next tranche to do the next bit of work. So just to allay any anxieties people might have about launching all these things all at once and then trying to resource them and then therefore not being effective. People will meet professionally in the background, that's not a problem. But in terms of specific work programs, if we align it like that, it should work. So to my earlier point, I'd like to sort of get a sense of whether people are prepared to take the assurance from the process, which I think is detailed in the paper, and Alison did speak to it, that this is in a good enough shape. And I should say it was endorsed at the subcommittee as well, that this is in one of those places where it's good enough to get going, and there's enough support and buy-in, there's enough clarity of focus on what it will do, and when we align it to the plan, it will have traction, which is what we needed to do.
So how do we respond? Because I think the questions about values and measurements and how far upstream, etc., are quite important ones. But as David said, and I alluded to, this has actually been through quite a lengthy process.
Can I, just to respond, I would support David in it's not just at kind of operational level, it's been to other NEMs, where we have the system NEM. So I would concur, and I do want to support. I think it really has had that sort of outing. I think it's just something about the implementation, and we haven't got the implementation at this point, and it's how the join up with other things. So, to Celia's point in terms of how things knit together, there are three areas that Alison talked about, and they do align to the key strategy, but I think it's that join up. And so I think what we say in terms of high level plan, from my perspective, I'd be supportive. I think it's always the devil's in the detail. It's the implementation plan we now need to see what that will look like in terms of how it all connects together.
If we said that we would sign off the clinical plan today, where it's got to, but actually the next step in terms of what people are asking, and I think this came out from earlier, is how are we going to do it? It's the implementation plan.
Yeah.
So it's signed off subject to seeing an implementation plan and how it joins with some of the other things. And I think that was also one of the other things that that came out from the questioning, wasn't it? So, does that provide a way through?
Yes, and we could, if we demonstrate the link to our priorities for next year, that will illustrate how it's going to be working. So we can do it with that.
Okay, and so what time period do we think would be useful or helpful to get an implementation plan back to board?
It depends when it can come back to board. We're not meeting again until May.
May, yeah.
It'll be ready well before then, because it'll come out as part of this planning round work that we're doing. So, shall we take that?
I was going to say, would we? I think we should include that in.
Absolutely.
Which is April, isn't it?
Yeah. And then back to. Thank you. That's really helpful. Alison, thank you very much. I think that's probably the best way to do it, rather than you coming back on all of the points that have been raised.
Yeah, no, and I was absolutely expecting that the next stage was an implementation and communications plan that would have to be signed off. So I wasn't seeing this as the final article. So thank you, board.
Thank you very much. Okay, Liz, that takes us to you for the work plan for the Prevention, Equity and Outcomes Committee.
Thank you, Claire. So as the board will recall, as part of the committee refresh, we introduced a Prevention, Equity and Outcomes Committee. The board saw an earlier iteration of this work plan, and it's then been revised following a conversation that happened at the first meeting of the committee, where the committee discussed in some detail its role and remit. The work plan was revised in light of this and then was approved at February's committee meeting. Hopefully the board agree that the work plan now shows a really strong focus on prevention, health and equality, sustainability, delivery programmes and commissioning, which are the key areas of responsibility for the committee. We've also built in certain deep dives to help build the committee's knowledge around key areas that sit within their remit. So we're asking stage and the board to agree with that work plan, noting it will develop over the course of the year as the committee becomes more embedded.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments? I will take that as approval then. Thank you very much. And that allows us then to move on to items for noting and assurance and discussion. And the first of those that we have is the Right Care, Right Person implementation. And I've got Helen down. Helen here?
Well,
okay.
I'm like, oh, great.
So do you want to start it?
Yeah, thanks, Helen. Now, actually, now, thank you. I'll continue to so this is going to be Kate, right? So Kate's throwing this over to me. And she told me at the beginning of the meeting, Kate's gone off to have a conversation about related to the CQC offset inspection with Dorset. So just so people are aware. So this is the Right Care, Right Person. We've done some briefings on this, and it's been to various other meetings. So hopefully colleagues have a working knowledge on it. Here's a note, because this is very, very high profile for the board. We need to respond to this changing agenda item, and we need to feel cited and ultimately assured that we're working on it, the plans are coming through, and that we're taking the right steps in the right order. And we're considering all the potential risks and challenges. So there'll be a few of these as it comes through, but this is the first update we're going to get on where it's got to so far and the first next steps that we're doing. And I know that's covered in the report, but if I invite Nell to come in and just give us, Nell, because we're a bit tight on time, just give us an update on the key things you'd like the board to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, and apologies that I'm not able to use my camera this afternoon, but I do have a small number of slides that I'd like to share now with you.
We're not seeing anything at, okay.
Hopefully you can see that now. Apologies.
We can.
Okay. So as board will be aware from the November update, Right Care, Right Person is a nationally agreed partnership agreement between Department of Health and Social Care and the Home Office as well. And the intention of it and the aim of it is to provide the right response to individuals in mental health crisis. But obviously it works wider than that in terms of the approach. ICBs across the country have taken different approaches, a lot of police-led, But within Dorset, we're having a system-wide collaborative approach, and you can see from the logos there that that includes fire and rescue, ambulance, people with lived experience representation, and VCSE as well. And I would say that we've had full engagement as well from all of those partners. So providing an update on progress on where we're at. So you'll see that we're actually leaning towards phase 1. It's a phased approach. There's 4 phases with the right care, right person implementation. Phase 1 being concern for welfare focus. The timescales have been set by Dorset Police in terms of how they're going to adapt their response to these particular phases. And the timescale around concern for welfare is a go live date of April. April the 15th is the date I've been given. It's been quite a challenge, as you can see, between sort of setting up the project between December and obviously the first phase being given that go live date. However, all partners have been working at pace, including through fortnightly task and finish groups to meet that challenge. The first activity that was undertaken together was a gap analysis, and the highlights or the emerging themes across the system from that gap analysis can be seen under certain headings. So powers, procedures and resources were identified as gaps. So just to give you a little flavour of the powers side of things, and it kind of illustrates some of the challenges as well. Powers of entry was raised in terms of what happens if say a social worker needs to have access and police are now not attending because it doesn't meet their threshold of serious harm or threat to life. And so the concern around how are we going to have entry. Interestingly, knowledge around some of these different clear lines of responsibility is also lacking. So a response around that powers of entry, police have said, actually, we don't have power of entry unless it's serious harm or threat of risk to life. So that's also highlighted a lack of knowledge of each other's different agencies' responsibilities. And that's something that's trying to be met right now. And I'll come on to that in a second about the Memorandum of Understanding and Partnership Agreement that's in development to be completed this month. You'll see there as well procedures. That's been highlighted as a gap, current procedures not being considered as being comprehensive currently. Again, clear lines of responsibility, each agency not necessarily understanding other agencies' legal and statutory responsibilities. And then also resources, risk and concern about if police aren't now going to be doing things that have been their custom and practice to date, then will that impact on the resources, considering that there is no additional budget for these changes, and also not understanding the costs at this time. So then the risks were also identified, probably not a surprise, but concern about a risk of harm in terms of if there's now a delay in response to those individuals and to those calls. And also that would be harm for the individuals, but also for staff as well. That was raised as a concern. Or if the response is delayed or inconsistent as well. Obviously, safeguarding falls into that. Resources again and procedures. Procedures were a consistent theme within this gap risk and mitigation analysis across the system. And then in terms of mitigation, which will be of particular interest, what was identified was we need to bridge the gap. We need to understand what's in procedures currently. We need to understand where there may be some conflicts. So, for example, missing people, missing persons protocols. There's already a Pan Dorset protocol in place, system-wide. How is that going to, how is that conflicting with the change in police practice going forward? What has been established within those protocols is that a memorandum of understanding needs to be developed. All partners have agreed that that needs to be put into place. And as I say, I'll come on to that in a second. And training as well is a need. How are staff going to be trained in new areas of business that they may need to be practicing? And staff in communications, we're picking up staff in communications and in fact training within the communications plan that has been agreed. Again, system-wide, so that we have a system-wide and consistent approach to how we're briefing staff and the wider public. So in terms of next steps, I'm going to come on to memorandum of understanding development because this is a key piece of mitigation work. What has been agreed is that by quick turnaround, and it's being led and supported by all the system, but being led by BCP, Adult Social Care leader. And what's been agreed is that we will look at and understand and sign up to an agreement of how we will approach those needs that have been identified within Right Care, Right Person. We will be looking at what individual legal responsibilities are there. We will agree to how to escalate, what the escalation protocols will be as well. And as I say, that is being drafted and proposed during this month and will be completed then. Also, other next steps imminently are the process mapping process that's in place at the moment. Dorset Healthcare have led on that exercise. That will be completed this month as well. Surface mapping, this is an exercise that was already underway and commissioned by Community Action Network. And so we're going to be, well, we have linked in with Community Action Network to see what services will probably meet the gaps, what's already out there, ensuring all the system know what is in place, what resources are there to be utilised. Data and costings, again, this is a tricky one and a challenge in terms of estimations. We have got an ask at the moment from Department of Health and Social Care to complete a survey, which I'm collating across the system to have an understanding of what is Right Care, Right Person likely to cost different agencies. And we're undertaking that at the moment. Data again, we're bringing that data together as best we can. Already examples from other areas have been utilised, and again a national request on those metrics as well, which I'm collating towards. Baseline information is being required of the police as well.
Are you towards the end?
I am. This is my last one. And then procedure review and development, as I say, as part of the MOU process development. And then obviously there'll be the standing up going forward of phase 3 and phase 4, but they are beyond April and July at the moment. That's the end of my slides. Stop sharing.
Yes, if you could, Debbie.
Sure.
Thanks, Al. That's really helpful. Just one question for me. It might be that it's agreed as part of the MOU when you actually set that up. Is there going to be some mechanism put in place around early sharing of incidents and then early resolution and learning? I think that would be really helpful from the start, so that we're capturing. There's bound to be issues, there's bound to be incidents that happen. So if we can get a mechanism in place to capture those really early and then share the learning and resolution really quickly, that will hopefully prevent us having ongoing issues.
Okay, Rhiannon.
Thank you. It obviously is the right thing to be looking at. This has been a wicked issue for decades, hasn't it? I just am interested to understand I suppose the level of confidence. I don't mean in the risks of delivering the project, the implementation. I mean the analysis of risk, particularly to the workforce in this change that will happen. The concern has been, hasn't it, to date, that it's not the right people providing the care. My concern is in those sort of challenge situations that we shift to it becomes not a police problem anymore, it becomes a health problem, which obviously in terms of the right care bit makes sense. but it's having the confidence that if there is a risk of harm to individuals or staff, that quick escalation and the need for the right response is not delayed in any way. So it's the risk analysis around that element of it, because I think that is perhaps the area where incidents might emerge.
Okay, Nick.
Yeah, I think so. Good to see the presentation. I think there is significant anxiety over these changes. I think we're already seeing behaviours change in advance of the formal date on the 15th of April. It's good to know that we've got we know the gaps. I guess the question, as I was looking at the slides, was so what are the actions and what's the plan to fill those gaps? And I don't feel entirely assured at the moment that we've got one. And my question really, I think, was going to be, so what's our level of confidence over our readiness for the 15th of April in particular, and what are the criteria that allow us to make as a collaborative partnership, as you described, to make a go no go decision for the 15th of April, because it could be that we need certain things in place to be ready to do this on the 15th of April. So what are they? And if they're not in place, are we in a position to say no?
Happy to respond. If I start with the last point first, because I think that's a really key one in terms of readiness. The last steering group raised concerns along the same line.
Speak to her now, I've muted her.
I was going to say no. Can I just take the last one, because we've only got one more question, and then if you come back on all of them, is that possible?
Yes, that's fine.
Perfect. Dan.
Nick stole my thunder. It's a really helpful paper, but I'd like some assurance on the targets and the success and the delivery. So are we going to be ready on the 15th of April? Are we going to be ready in July for AWOL? When's the comms engagement plan that's touched on in here rolling out? It's the kind of forward-looking, a bit of assurance that it will be delivered or not that feels missing. But that was a long-winded way of saying plus one to what Nick said.
And Nell, if I just come in really quickly there, because and in part it picks up the question, I guess, that Rhiannon raised. This came about as a result of one of the police forces saying they weren't going to take these people anymore, and so they were going to hand them over to health. And I think the way that we have approached it in Dorset, which is actually looking at the individuals and therefore thinking about how do we make sure that we get this transition right for those people, is exactly the right way. So I don't want you to leave thinking we've kind of misunderstood. I think some of the questions around that final piece around how we make it happen are important, but I feel confident from the approach that you've already made that actually those things are being considered. So I'll hand back to you anyway to respond to the questions.
Thank you, appreciated. So yeah, in terms of the challenge of readiness, the friction, if you like, is between the desire of all partners to actually see this as an opportunity. There's actually a recognition that we can put things into the right place. There's acknowledgement all round that this is the right thing to do, but the challenge comes with the timescale that has been presented to the system, and that was raised at the last steering group. You'll note within the report that the steering group concluded that actually by the next and last steering group before the implementation date, that the steering group will make a determination as to whether they approve or don't approve. That said, equally, Dorset Police have that they use the term soft launch, but equally retracted that in terms of not an approved comms term, but a soft launch with the desire to not create risk, to not and to use points of learning and to move forward, bearing in mind this is the first phase as well. So I think together that reduces that level of anxiety, or for me, that level of anxiety, but it is a challenge, and there's no doubt about that, because what is being identified is there are gaps there already. And that partners would like to meet those gaps, and to reduce them, and to work collaboratively together to develop perhaps service agreements between one or two, and that takes perhaps longer time than we have been given. But as I say, my understanding from Dorset Police is there's not a desire to push this forward hard and fast, and there's a desire to take points of learning, not least from the control room, who I understand have anxieties themselves, because this is against usual custom and practice to be diverting away. And I think that's how we've come to this position, really, of Dorset Police attending things that perhaps are not within their sphere of responsibility. In terms of shared learning, I think I've just mentioned that, really, and confidence. Probably I've just mentioned that within there, really, that there is confidence about moving forward, but whether it's within the April, the final steering group will raise to Dorset Police as to whether they agree. But there is the view that we will have an MOU, the intention and the view that it can be achieved, that we will have an MOU in place. Have I captured everybody's questions? Apologies if I...
And thank you for stepping in at the last minute as well on your own to cover this. I guess what we would say is if there are implementation issues, and they're significant ones, that they should come back to the board, but we'll leave it in everybody's hands that's working on this to get the MOU sorted, and yeah, hope that things work out as they need to make this work for.
Just say, I suggest that we'll make sure we capture in the quality report once it goes live any issues, and then they'll come through to the board that way. So I'll make sure that the team capture.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Debbie. And thank you again, Neil.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
That leads us on, Dean, to the ICB annual assessment. You've set out the process for us to do that. Can I ask you to assume that people have read the paper and then just cover anything?
Thank you. I hope the paper's quite self-explanatory. Kind of there's two parts to the assessment. One is the use of our annual report, which we're preparing at the moment, and the second is any feedback from health and wellbeing boards. Process takes place kind of between now and the end of July.
Okay, nice and brief. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Julian.
Jenny, just an offer to help if any help is needed in engaging with the BCP Council Health and Wellbeing Board. Okay. Certainly manage that between now and July.
Thank you very much.
I was just going to ask, had we any sense why there hadn't yet been any feedback from Health and Wellbeing boards on your point in 3.6?
I think last year we used a different process as well, because we did Health Watch did one-to-one interviews with lots of different partners. So we kind of did a much more in-depth process last year, being our first year. Whereas this year, I think we can rely on the normal processes, having done that for last year, because that feedback was valuable last year. But kind of this I think is how we need to do it for this year.
Yeah. Okay, it's here for noting, and it's noted. So that allows us to move on. And the items for consent, we haven't had anybody raise those for discussion, so we're not going to do that. Which then takes us to questions from the public. And we had one received into the ICB. It's a question from Mr. R. Rawlinson. And the question is, West Dorset seems to have a particular issue with community pharmacy medicine supply. Former Lloyd's chemists are unable to supply many medicines, and people are having to travel from Bridport to Beerminster to access pharmacies that can supply. Alternatively, patients are being referred back to their GP practices or travelling to other pharmacies, and this is putting more pressure on other community pharmacies and also GP practices. Is this included in the risk logs for the board, and what can the board do to assure the public that the sustainability of supplies from former Lloyd's pharmacies in West Dorset is being worked upon? I appreciate that the whole of community pharmacy is under immense pressure, but would really appreciate the board's response as to levels of awareness for this population and what, if anything, can be done. And the response to the question is the Department for Health and Social Care has a medicine supply team who constantly monitor supply of medicines into the UK and provide central alerts to the NHS to notify generalised supply concerns. Medicine supply has improved from peak disruption last autumn, but is still constrained for selected medicines due to global production system issues. Where there is local supply disruption, NHS Dorset would escalate the matter through our usual risk management process with the South West Commissioning Hub to support community pharmacy. NHS Dorset has received confirmation that these issues are currently resolved. We're therefore happy to provide Mr. Rollison a more detailed response outside of the meeting if requested. So thank you. That just takes us to any other business. I'm not going to go around the table. If anybody has any other business, please indicate, including we've got on the screen. Okay, I should take silence as no. So Liz, can I go to you and Steph for any key messages from part one, and then I'll pick up the review after that.
So the key messages that I thought I heard this morning were that we welcome BCP's early health approach, noting the links with system partners, and recognising the immediate and longer term benefits to our local communities. I heard that we probably had a commitment to using we rather than you when we're having conversations with system working. We noted the impact of the ongoing industrial action on our services, finances, patient experience and colleagues. We welcome the positive improvements around out-of-area mental health placements and also delivery against 21 of the operating standards, making those improvements reduce the hard work across our partners. We know that no criteria for design remains a challenge for partners across the system, but there's been demonstrable system working between partners to address this. The board supported the improved training plan, and then we also welcome the system-wide collaborative approach to right care, right person.
Great. Anything else people captured that they haven't heard? Okay. Thank you. Can we do then a quick review of the meeting? And it might help to look at this in not just in the sense of how we conducted the business today, but whether or not we feel that we're in line with our joint forward plan, the kind of role of the ICB. I heard today quite a lot of inputs and questions and comments around communities and prevention and outcomes. So I think we're heading there. But what do people think about today's board meeting? And you don't have to comment. So you might think, oh my God, she's staring at me. But it's just if you've got anything key that you want to say about today. And I'll try not to look at anybody. Debbie.
I think there was some healthy discussion. There was some healthy challenge. I think it was, like you said, good to hear the challenge coming in from the kind of understanding of our position and also understanding of how we want to link our transformation with our current position. So I think it felt like we were getting there, and there was a clear understanding from our NEDs on the board of the situations that we're in, and I think that is really positive from my perspective.
John?
I think "we, not you" was such a snappy phrase, but it encapsulates what we are here to do. And I felt from the story at the beginning, thinking about children and their well-being through life and how that needs to knit together. We had a conversation about electronic patient records and how we need to be doing the we. I think we heard it generally on the joint forward plan, and I do have an issue with the fact that we are NHS Dorset, but actually it was great that it just felt like Dorset today. Much more, and I think that is really positive. And sometimes themes do come up, and I think we've just been much more Dorset focused for the better, because it hasn't just been a health conversation. So I think that's a positive reflection, I hope.
I absolutely concur with that as well. Really do. I think that was so important. And it kicked off the day in a really positive mood. And I think the meetings flowed from that. Yeah. Thank you.
Cecilia, were you trying to come in as well?
Again, I think there is more. Yes, I was just going to say there is more. I think that we do. So there is more prevention. There is more to talk about the ICP wider thing. I think there are still more groups that could actually be included in there.
Yeah.
And I still have a frustration that we had some plans without the finances, the financial part of that plan associated with it. It still strikes me as the oddest thing that somebody can present a plan and there isn't an associated set of finances. But I don't know whether we've just got better at asking questions or whether we've actually gelled as a team, because wasn't so long ago that we were asked to try and haul back on some of the comments that we were making and make them a little bit more guarded perhaps. I think now we're actually getting to do those right, and we are being able to challenge without people feeling that that we're directing the challenge at them personally. I think that's changed quite dramatically.
Rihanna, you were trying to come.
Yeah, no, sorry, I didn't realise Celia was waiting. I'd concur, particularly with what John was saying and what Cecilia said, but there was a bit for me about the we. So what is it we're not yet doing to support partners in understanding what the joint plan and the strategy is? Because they and it's not a criticism, because it's about what can we do to help them feel more part of the we. Am I making sense? So I just wondered if there was a role that more could be done, just in terms of, particularly when they're going to be team, other agencies, other organisations are presenting, just what that kind of conversation to help them to orientate into the we space, I suppose, before they pitch up. That's kind of where I'm coming from.
You said?
Yeah, I think one of the things we can do is our language, and I still think that's an area where we need to improve. We still speak NHS, and I think I'm starting to understand it better, which on the one hand I'm pleased with, on the other hand I said I wouldn't do. And so I keep trying to go back to human speak in my head rather than NHS speak. And sometimes when I do that and I switch my NHS brain off, I sit here and I think, if I brought my next door neighbour in here, or if I brought the local food bank manager in here and she sat here, she would not have a clue what probably about 50% of the words we were using meant. So I think we're getting better at it for sure. But I still think that we can work harder at being clearer and using less jargon. And I recognise that there is a place for some of the words we use, but I think we can work a bit harder at that in these meetings sometimes.
Dan, Rob, then David.
I'm going to try and use purposely quite private sector language, because the positive thing for me was really around the 5-year plan. And I think there's some stuff that our owner or investor or funder is mandated from us. But it's really nice we started to use those things for our purpose and what we want for Dorset. And I think that there is a shift in that, and I think that's really positive. The bit that I reflect back to us is, I think they, as in the owner or the parent, are still driving the timeline, and we're using our governance to fit to national timelines. And that, I suspect, there's board support for a little bit of pushback, and let's make sure that we do the activity to a pace that suits us, whilst meeting the mandate, but we're really starting to use it about us and our residents rather than box ticking.
Rob?
So I'm just thinking of Cecilia's comment, because it's an interesting one about where are the numbers on some of these things. And sometimes, I say, where are the plans to put the numbers on versus a process of engagement and a development thing. And there are numbers for the pillars and the high level things, and there is something I'm going to take away from it, because we're probably in a position where you don't like the finances to drive things. You'd rather get the right things and find money to fall out the back. But we're probably in a different position now, so we might need to put the money up front a little bit more and force that through some of this to drive it. So I'll take that away.
So I take all of that on board, and I think it's really helpful and really healthy that we can have this reflection and the nature of the conversations we had what I really want to say is a big thank you to the ICB exec team, because we're coming into this meeting in a really, really stressed, difficult position. And I think the way I've experienced it, our colleagues have conducted themselves exceptionally well under that pressure. And I think what I also blame is that the nature of the conversation and the pushing back and forth across the colleagues in the room and where we've had the discussions is a sign of how healthy we've got, because it's not taken defensively and we haven't got into that sort of defensive mode. And so I want to thank everybody for that kind of nature of that discussion. I think it's worth reflecting that and playing that in so people understand the context for it. But thank you, everybody.
So can I also just add a couple of things then? So I think the level of scrutiny felt right to me today in terms of some of the challenge, some of the questions. I guess one of the things that we need to do, though, to make that even sharper is to make sure that that we are scrutinising the right thing, if that makes sense. So I'd just go back to the clinical plan, because it felt as if we were all saying this is not ready when actually it had been through so many processes. And it might be that our thinking had moved on, and so that means that we present that in a different way. Or I think where we got to at the end, which replicated some of the other discussions, that how we're going to get there is not there. And so maybe that's how we frame the questions moving forward, because I think some of the earlier discussions, that's exactly what we did. We said, actually, it's really good, but how are we going to do that? And I think the how is really important. So I want us to hang on to that and maybe use that to frame those questions. I think the second thing, and it's to pick up the point that Cecilia made around the finance, and I think Rob is exactly right. I think one of the reasons we don't get that is because I think a lot of our reports are focused on the process, the engagement, not necessarily the how. So to go back to the same thing. And I think when we get to the how, the performance piece and then the finance and the workforce that is then required to be alongside of those things start to become clearer. So I guess an encouragement to the executive and your teams to really start pushing at the how we're going to do that, so we can think about how we're going to do that. I guess the last two things for me is that I think sometimes it can feel as if we're kind of pushing against a wider NHS that hasn't really understood the role and the concept of ICBs. And I say that guardedly as somebody that used to work in the centre, particularly when ICBs was being conceived. But actually, one of the things I was able to do today was to kind of step back from that and think some of the terminology is now catching up. So we had the electronic patient records, and that's now moved fairly recently to the health record, recognising that health is much broader, and therefore I think bringing in some of those other concepts. So maybe if we just hang on to some of those things, I think it would help us to move forward. And then the very last thing, I agree also. I think that shift to us was really powerful this morning to start the discussion off. And so I wanted to thank Gillian in particular and your colleagues for being in the room and actually participating in that broader discussion, because I think it helps us to lift our sights from just looking at health. It's a shame that we didn't have to sit here today, and I think we've kind of flip-flopped between Dorset being here, BCP not being here, that kind of stuff. But actually, I think there is a real richness to having local government in the room, and primary care and the VCS sector. So it's really powerful having that collective as an ICB. I want us to really forge at that. But I want to pay particular thanks to you, Gillian. That was it from me. So I think almost spot on. Gosh, can't we burned ourselves some lunch. And then we start back at 2 o'clock. That concludes the meeting in public.
Okay.